and gentlemen, we're about to begin. We'll ask that if you are not sitting next to anyone, that you please come to the front, because we have a very special program today where we're going to have some conversations, and we want to make sure that the tables all have folks. So if you're not sitting next to someone, make sure you move to the front of the room. Thank you, and welcome to Houston Energy and Climate Week.
The responsibility to lead the global transition to a cleaner, more dependable energy future. In 2017, after Hurricane Harvey, the city got the Climate Action Plan off the ground, and in 2020, you held a virtual Climate Week to have the implementation of the Climate Action Plan. Allies in Energy aims to galvanize the work that's already been done by the city. We want to make sure that we have something that endures through administrations and is something that is a mainstay of the city and a part of the community. Cities around the world have hosted climate weeks for decades, and the structure of Houston Energy and Climate Week is very similar. It's a week of self-organized events that are bookcased by an opening and closing ceremony that we hosted by Allies in Energy. However, there's one strategic thing that's different about what we're trying to do here, and that is the unity commitment. What you can see there is that we express that we believe the world must be a livable and safe, healthy place, and that everybody has a stewardship to that, whether that's an individual or an industry. But how we think uniquely, we want to make sure that the sustained development and the growing prosperity is something that requires the collaboration of everyone. The oil and gas community, heavy industry, what we see from climate tech, zero waste initiatives, renewable energy, community members. We all need to come together to create a platform of united action so that every voice is heard and every sector is engaged in our shared mission. Together, we can make Houston a model for sustainable energy growth and for community resilience. Good morning, welcome everybody. Wanted to be the first to welcome you to Houston Energy and Climate Week. Thank you so much for being here. This week we're gathering some of the brightest minds. We have innovators from academia, from industry, and from the government and from our local communities. And we're here to have meaningful conversations and share the latest research and inspire action. Our goal is to explore solutions that will enable a resilient energy future, one that balances the energy demands and our responsibility for tomorrow. At Allies in Energy, our mission is to find and inspire the future energy leaders of tomorrow to ensure the future is ready. We also want to work to build bridges and promote unity and support pragmatic conversations between all sectors, whether that's oil and gas, heavy industries, climate technology, conversations between conservation and alternative energies, or any other stakeholders in that energy landscape. Here in Houston, we want to ensure everybody has a place at the table. So Houston Energy and Climate Week is a testament to that approach, and I am thrilled to see so many passionate individuals and organizations coming together. I would like to take a moment to express my heartfelt gratitude to all of our sponsors, our partners, and our volunteers that have made today happen. We have worked tirelessly, you have given generously, and you have helped make this event possible. So thank you to the City of Houston, to Harris County, to EarthX, Fox 26, HCC, the Moxie Hotel, AWS, BBVA, EDP Renewables, Vagary Drinker, Gallant, Octopus Energy, Syzygy Plasmonics, and many more of our host partners that will have events throughout the week. So I hope you all got a grab of that guidebook because we have 75 events to see this week. I also want to point out some of our showcase sponsors that are here in person. So we have OGGN, Mark LaCour from the OGGN podcast, who many of you had a chance to sit down and have a conversation with. We also have Craftsroom Solar in the room, and Mission Zero. So some of our startup sponsors and partners here to be a part of the day. I also want to point out Peter Durant with Alpha Chimp. As you see, he's going to be doing some visual facilitation throughout the presentation, graphical displays of what we're talking about and what you're seeing today. So thank you to all of you as well. We couldn't have done this without you. To our speakers and our panelists, thank you for sharing your expertise and your insights. Your contributions will spark new ideas, but hopefully will inspire some pragmatic solutions that we know how to do here in Houston that are going to help us navigate the energy complexities of the future. And to all of you here in person and online, thank you for being here. I encourage you to engage fully in discussions, to challenge your own assumptions, and to build connections that will extend beyond this week. So please help me in welcoming our co-chairs for the week, Katie Maynard and Juliana Garzar.
Ready to do this? Yeah. Okay.
Don't get close.
Don't get too close.
I'm gonna get here.
All right, I'm going to go over here.
As far as possible.
That's right.
You wanna get started?
You go start.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody to the inaugural Houston Energy and Climate Week. So this is the first week for Houston. Big applause.
Woo! You did it!
We did it. Katie and I met at a parking lot. That's when we plot, when we are about to go home, and it's like, wouldn't it be nice if we also had a climate week? We were frustrated, all of these climate weeks, New York, Miami, LA, and Houston. In Houston, we do hard things. That's the theme of this climate week, this inaugural climate week. And we do. We put men in the moon, we solve cancer, and we're going to solve this energy transition for sure. So one of the things that are different is that we call ourselves the Houston Climate and Energy Week, because we wanted to make a point. A lot of climate events is about division, blaming, finger pointing. In our case, we know, because we are Houstonians, that energy transition can only happen with oil and gas. And that's why we decided to do the unity commitment. It's our motto, it's what matters to us, and it's about doing everything together. That's what they say, right? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I'm so pleased to see all familiar faces here today, and I know that many of you are streaming online. Let's hope, we're having more than 100 events. We're expecting more than 5,000 people at all of these events. Let's hope that the weather holds, because it looks like there might be a storm coming on Wednesday. Well, I'm having my own grand opening for Energy Tech Nexus tomorrow, so hopefully, we will survive. And now I want to make sure we introduce someone who's a very dear friend of mine. I'm so happy that for this Climate Week we have so many people who are visiting us from outside of Houston, because this Climate Week is all about showcasing what we do. I think in Houston we are very good at doing things, but we're not that good at telling what we do. Everything is like behind closed doors, or we're just too busy working or too humble to brag about ourselves. And that's why we need to make sure that we bring people from outside of Houston. And of course, when I asked my very good friend Kerry Bowie to come over, he was like, sure, tell me where and when and I'll be there. Kerry has been a longtime friend. He's the founder of many initiatives, but the one I'm more excited about is Browning the Green Space. He started in Boston to make sure that the green space was more diverse. And when he told me, I'm a Texan at heart, I lived in Dallas for a while, and I want to come to Houston to green the brown space. And I'm like, okay, that sounds good too. Kerry not only has put together Brown in the Green Space, he has done many other things. He's a partner of mine in Malika Ventures, which is a VC fund that specializes in environmental justice. And together we put together Excel, which is the first ever accelerator program for BIPOC founders in the clean tech industry. Just last week, it was the last showcase for Excel after 2 years of success. And he decided to stay here to be in the inaugural Climate Week for Houston and to be talking about the unity commitment. So with no further ado, I'll pass it to Kerry.
Good morning, and thank you, Juliana. When Juliana and Katie asked, especially Katie when she asked you come, I actually met her a number of years ago, asked me to come down to speak. And before I read the unity commitment, just wanted to share a little bit more about why I think this is so important. Like Juliana said, you guys, the same way we started to partner with accelerators and green spaces, we were like, we want to see more Black and brown people there. Houston is the energy capital of the world, and so you all have to be a part of this transition. A number of years ago when I was studying in school, and up in Boston, we're definitely trying to push really hard for renewable energy. I had to write an epitaph for the fossil fuel energy, and it was really, really hard. Because what you recognize is, even as we talk about transitions don't happen right away. I used to work for Texas Instruments doing energy work, and we would have dual feeds coming in from the utility and Cyberx switches. So that's a transition, but that's an instantaneous transition. We know that's not going to happen. So being realistic, we want to think about that. And the other piece, Juliana talked about our Excel showcase. We had a couple of, 7 founders pitch. A couple of them I'll mention, Andre and Gabby from Access Sky Renewables. They're doing renewables, but they both come from the oil and gas industry. And I think coming from the oil and gas industry actually helps them to think about all the infrastructure, the logistics, all the things that are there. So I think they're really poised to do the work that they're doing because of that. And then the last thing I'll say is sort of a bit of a cautionary tale. If you're content and you just sort of stay where you are, on the tracks, you will get run over. And so I think about in the sort of Boston area, when I was at MIT, we had one of the lecture halls, before you would go into the exam, you would rub the nose of George Eastman from Eastman Kodak Company. And Polaroid, we also had a Polaroid plant. Polaroid filed for bankruptcy in 2001, and Kodak filed for bankruptcy in 2012. Both of them had access to sort of digital photography and thinking about it, but they were like, nah, we're gonna do it the way we've been doing it, and they missed. And I think there was an opportunity or a cautionary tale in the oil and gas industry. You've got all the expertise, you got the chops, you've got everything, and we know it's not going away right away. But if you lean into the renewable space, it's really going to help us get there that much faster. And we know that there's been some pushback, but I think there's an opportunity, like we said, to be together. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to read the unity statement. So we do hard things, and Houston Energy and Climate Week is an inclusive vehicle for unity. Energy is the currency of life. Energy demand is skyrocketing in America and abroad. However, the impact of this prosperity presents a challenge to ensure that energy is reliable, affordable, accessible, and sustainable. Climate change is real, and the science is settled. Most Americans recognize it, and nearly 2/3 say it impacts their communities. At the core of the unity commitment is the need to bring human and financial capital to rapidly address these challenges and transform how the world produces and consumes energy. Houston is the energy capital of the world. The Gulf South region brings a unique and diverse ecosystem and infrastructure to drive this transformation. We cannot do this alone, Human ingenuity is in our DNA, and we appreciate it's a both and not or approach to address these challenges. We know, from an environmental perspective, the world must be livable and healthy for humanity and life on this planet. In the short and long term, industry must accelerate investment and market viable technologies to lower emissions while simultaneously educating consumers about the role they can play too. From an equity perspective, people of all backgrounds and life experiences must have an opportunity to benefit from the energy transition and to have their voices heard. Diversity delivers greater innovation, profitability, and outcomes, and will ensure a just transition. And from an economic perspective, an expanded energy economy and just transition must build prosperity, it must create jobs, and offer skill development to our communities. We must increase investments and pace to build critical infrastructure and a robust workforce and talent pipeline for future generations. So, we believe the changing climate does not spare anyone based on their ideology. Activism is about education, unity, and urgency, not division. We need to fight the changing climate, not each other. We respect democracy, civil dialogue, diverse ideas, productivity, and pragmatism. The energy transition needs to include the oil and gas community. Advancements in energy will not be possible without the participation and contribution of the oil and gas and heavy industry communities. We recognize and appreciate the human capital and technologies the oil and gas community brings to develop these solutions. The energy transition is a marathon and team sport that needs unified action. Achieving Energy 2.0 plus is a marathon. However, this race needs an increased pace. We will get there through urgency, teamwork, consistency, continued investment, and collaboration. We also commit ourselves to assessing our collective advancements and setbacks in achieving these goals. Thank you for your commitment, and welcome again to Houston Energy and Climate Week. Thank you.
How are you, Houston? I can't hear you, Houston. Come on. We got to make sure everybody online knows what they're missing here in the room. Welcome to University of Houston. Where are the Cougars? We got Cougars. Woo! Sorry, I'm an LSU girl, but you know, for today I'll be a Cougar. Thank you so much for coming. Today is about transformation, and this week is about learning and connecting. Our theme this year, the inaugural year, is We Do Hard Things. Everybody look at the table. Right in front of you, you should have a coin. If you're online, you missed out. But you should see the coin. Everybody see the coin? Okay, on the front, it says, We Do Hard Things. 7 years ago, yesterday, my home in West Houston finally drained after Hurricane Harvey. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Of course you do. This city was deluged. This city was put under test, but this city rised. This city is strong. This city is full of talent, and we know how to do hard things. And I'm very excited that we have today with us Leslie Briones, our commissioner from Harris County, to come talk to us for a few moments about hard things. Please give her a warm Houston welcome.
Good morning, Houston.
Good morning.
Good morning, Harris County residents. I'm Leslie Briones, and I'm very grateful to be one of your Harris County commissioners. First, can we please give a round of applause to Lindsay, Juliana, and Katie for hosting this. Such bold, brilliant women who know how to get things done and who will lead us through ongoing transformational change. So thank you for your leadership. And thank you to all of the sponsors. We really appreciate your support. I am proud to live in the energy capital of the world. And I'm sure many of you feel the same way. And I know that together, we will not only be the energy capital of the world, but we will also be the global leader in the energy transition. And not only do we want to keep dominating because we're proud Texans, but more importantly, I believe as a mother of three, we have a moral obligation and there's an economic imperative, frankly. This is a both and. Let's continue dominating in the traditional energy space and in the renewable space. I'm so happy that the theme is Houston, we do hard things. We continuously have to do hard things, and I am very focused on all of the disasters that we have been experiencing as of late, between the derecho, between Hurricane Beryl, and I pray what is not to be the next storm later this week. My team and I and many other team members from Harris County and the city of Houston are the first responders. Minutes after each storm, we're out there picking up debris, setting up cooling centers, distribution centers for food, ice, and water. We know the human cost, the trauma that I'm sure most of us in this room have experienced, the deaths that unfortunately have happened, and the intense economic costs. So just after the derecho, the estimate is $5 to $8 billion is the cost of this rare windstorm that we experienced in May. We saw that nearly 1 million customers were without power, just like this. And then a few weeks later with Beryl, over 2.2 million people, myself included, I'm sure most of you in this room who are from Harris County, did not have power. And the economic damage for Beryl is estimated at $2.5 billion to $3.5 billion. Imagine if that money was spent on investment and prevention. Imagine if that money was spent on education, healthcare, and beyond. We know these storms are continuing to come, so we are taking action at Harris County. I'll give you a few illustrative, quick examples. In terms of the short term, we are improving our ditch maintenance. So when a storm hits, when we have heavy rain, the water is able to convey to the nearest channel or bayou. We at Harris County recently passed the first ever climate action plan for Harris County, where we committed to reduce our emissions by 40% by 2030. So whether that's working on converting our fleet, adding solar and storage to our community centers and libraries, Harris County is getting to work. In terms of the midterm, we are working to deliver the flood bond projects, as well as now that we are getting our over $1 billion in CDBG mid funds at Harris County, we are delivering these new flood infrastructure projects that will help protect all of our families. We are also working to expand the options. I was very thankful to the Biden-Harris administration that gave Harris County and a group of other counties and cities in Texas approximately $250 million Solar for All grant. This Solar for All grant will help us add solar options here in Harris County for our most vulnerable community members. Also will create strong union jobs, and will help us have greater independence from our grid that needs improvement, to put it nicely. Another area that we're exploring, it's never been done in Texas yet, but again, with the persistence and passion and focus in this room, I believe it'll happen. It's called CEFI, the State Energy Financing Institution. It's a Department of Energy program available across the country. And so Harris County proactively has reached out to the state GLO, working with the governor's office, and it's a low-interest loan where we can upgrade infrastructure, existing infrastructure, as well as exploring new options. Lastly, I'll give one example. Every infrastructure project that my team and I in Precinct 4 work on, we put through an Envision framework, where we look at the equity, the sustainability, the resiliency, and the connectivity of each infrastructure project. So as we invest your taxpayer dollars, we want to make sure we're maximizing the ROI. And as we work on these more short and midterm projects, we are continuing to work with the Army Corps of Engineers to continue exploring the possibility of a deep tunnel system, for instance. So we believe that we must not only respond as nimbly as possible, but put ourselves in a more protective, safe space, as we know we will continue to endure these unfortunate disasters. I have a tremendous sense of urgency. I have 3 daughters. My youngest daughter just turned 7 yesterday. She was my Harvey baby. And luckily she stayed in, but I thought she was going to be born during Harvey. I was having intense contractions. My home, praise God, was not flooded, but everywhere around me was flooded. There would have been no way I could have safely gotten to a hospital. And I thought I was going to have her in the bathtub. By the grace of God, she waited. But she is my visible reminder of how long it has been since Harvey, and just how much more work we have yet to do. So the work continues. Know that my team and I and all of your Harris County representatives will continue to be as proactive and purposeful. But the truth is, this is all of us. We are partnering actively with the nonprofit sector, with academia, with the for-profit sector, and as somebody who proudly represents the energy corridor, we know that it is in partnership that we will be able to deliver the maximum protection and the maximum economic opportunity in this region. So we look forward to working together for many years to come so that Harris County continues to be the energy capital of the world and the world's leader in the transition. I look forward to us being this model of resiliency and sustainability so that all of our families can have the protection that they deserve. So with that, fingers crossed that we have a safe week and we're able to continue this week without another storm. And again, my deepest thanks to all of the sponsors and to our wonderful, fearless leaders. And with that, I would please a small token of our deep respect and gratitude. So if you could please join me. And let us once again show them our thanks and our excitement for this inaugural week.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, just take pictures with your phone. Thank you so much. All right, so let's get our program started. Thank you so much to our commissioner, and thank you so much to everyone who's joined us here and who has just recently joined us online. So what are we going to do this morning? Well, we're going to have a civil dialogue. I said we're going to have a civil dialogue. You're laughing. If there is ever a time that we've needed to have a civil dialogue in this country, it is now. With the presidential election several weeks away, this country has been struggling to have civil conversations. It will take us all to engage in this process to keep our republic healthy and on course. But how? How do we do this? How do we listen, learn, and engage? And yes, disagree without fear of judgment. Without being demonized. Anybody feel demonized sometimes in those conversations? So, raising your hands. So today we're going to explore the energy transition and the pragmatic nature of this transformation. Every challenge that we face is an opportunity. And this transition is an opportunity to have an open discussion about solutions, all solutions. Hosted by multiple presidential libraries and policy institutes, the Civil Dialogues Initiative seeks to create a safe space for community conversation on some of the most important topics of the day. And today it is my pleasure to hand over to one of our moderators for the first ever discussion on energy and climate here in Houston. Gene Becker, former Chief of Staff to George H.W. Bush until his death, the co-founder of Civil Dialogues and New York Times best-selling author. Please give a warm welcome to Gene.
Good morning. Thank you, Katie. It's an honor to be here today. By the time George H.W. Bush turned 24 years old in 1948, he had been shot down during World War II, for which he received the Distinguished Flying Cross. He had met and married Barbara Pierce. They'd had their first of 6 children, that would be George W. Bush, and he had graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Yale in 2.5 years, during which he served as captain of the Yale baseball team. I did not tell you all that to make you feel bad about your life, for you to be thinking, wait a minute, what have I done? That was all by the time he turned 24. You might think this is an odd beginning to help kick off Houston's Energy and Climate Week, but it leads to what young George Bush did next in his already overachieving life. He turned down a comfortable, lucrative job on Wall Street, instead driving to Texas in a 1947 Studebaker to get into the oil business. For him, it was a dream come true. Even if it did mean moving his wife and baby into a duplex in Odessa, Texas, that they shared with a prostitute mother and daughter team. That's another whole story, which I'll tell another day. He started as an oil equipment salesman, or as he called it, at the very bottom. But he wanted and needed to learn the industry. He felt ready by 1951 to start his own company in Midland called Bush Overby Oil Development, which they renamed Zapata. That was named for some movie that was playing in Midland at the time. In 1953, when he teamed with the Litkey brothers, Hugh and Bill. As he wrote in his book of letters called All the Best, that was published in 1998, President Bush admitted his letters back home to family and friends during this time period were, well, boring. They were all about the oil business. I was the editor of that book. Boring. If I had to read one more letter about an oil well drill, I would have quit the whole project. I think we have a photo of him from his early oil days. There it is. That's him when they were living in Midland, Texas. In 1959, they split Zapata into 2 companies, one to focus on offshore drilling, which George Bush headed up. He decided it might be smart if he was going to head up an offshore oil drilling company to move closer to water. So he moved his growing family from Midland to Houston. This photo is at the dedication of their first offshore oil drilling rig. I think I said that wrong. With him would be his oldest son, George W. Bush. Okay, don't panic. We're going to fast forward to 1990. We're going to skip the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, and we're going to fast forward to 1990. That's when the self-made Texas oil man, as President of the United States, lobbied for, got passed, and signed into law the Clean Air Act amendments. Richard Nixon had actually signed the Clean Air Act in 1973, but it needed a major update, and President George H.W. Bush managed to accomplish that. Was it easy? When President Bush was at the Grand Canyon signing one of many pieces of legislation connected to the Clean Air Act, he compared negotiating the Clean Air Act amendments to negotiating the end of the Cold War with Mikhail Gorbachev and the Soviets. It was not easy. He had 2 houses of Congress that were both held by the Democrats. He was a Republican, a champion of big business. And oh, did I mention he was also a Texas oil man? But as he said at the signing of the bill, this is a quote from President Bush, "I first made a commitment to comprehensive clean air legislation when I was running for this job. I believe, and I think we all felt, that it was time for a new approach. It was time to break the logjam that hindered progress on clean air for 13 years. And so I told our best minds that I assembled a year and a half ago, every American expects and deserves to breathe clean air. As a president, it is my mission to guarantee it for this generation and for all generations to come." By the way, in case you're wondering, with him signing that bill is Vice President Dan Quayle, Energy Secretary James Watkins, and EPA Administrator William Riley. The bill passed in 1990 went after 3 main types of air pollution: acid rain, smog, and toxic air pollutants. Did it work? I will tell you, I had so much fun researching the answer to that question. I wasn't sure. Here's what I found. From 1990 to 2010, total emissions of the 6 principal air pollutants decreased by more than 41% in the United States, while the gross domestic product increased more than by 64%. In other words, the bill did not hurt the economy. On the 30th anniversary of the bill, the results were even more dramatic. Annual sulfur dioxide emissions from power plants had decreased by 94% between 1990 and 2019, and annual emissions of nitrogen oxides from power plants fell 86%. If he was here, President Bush would be the first to tell you the job is not done. It might never be done, which doesn't mean we should give up. My guess is he would be very pleased with the bipartisan, I should say with President Biden's bipartisan Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, which included major environmental legislation. But again, we're not done. That's why we're here today. As we nervously watch the Gulf of Mexico, how many of you are checking your phones right now to see what's going on with Francine? We know our very existence depends on making progress every single year, which is why we need to find a way to work together, just as that Texas oil man did 35 years ago. He said then, there's an old saying, we don't inherit the earth from our parents, we borrow it from our children. We have succeeded today because of a common sense of global stewardship, a sense that it is the earth that endures, and that all of us are simply holding a sacred trust left for future generations. I have some pictures of him at the Grand Canyon. I confess I'm showing you the first one. I'm only showing you that one to say, I don't think any of us would be allowed to stand where he's standing. I'm guessing the Secret Service were very nervous when the President of the United States decided to stand there. The next photo actually became an iconic photo of him at the Grand Canyon, which what better place to promote our environment. Anyway, as he talked about the future generations 35 years ago, I have news for you. That's us. We are the future generation he was talking about. So it's time for us to get to work for the generations that come after us. That is why Linda Laurel and I were so honored to be invited to be part of the opening session of Houston's Energy and Climate Week. We were honored, but I also would confess we were a little surprised. Linda, forgive me for saying this, but we don't know anything about climate change. We know that we want to help fix it, but it's not exactly in our wheelhouse. But I didn't realize what a perfect fit we were for this meeting until I heard your Unity Pledge this morning. I'm not sure if they read it or not. Did they read the Unity Pledge? Okay, good. My favorite part, quote, activism is about education, unity, and urgency, not division. We need to fight the changing climate, not each other. We respect democracy, civil dialogue, diverse ideas, productivity, and pragmatism. You are speaking our language. More than a year ago, Linda and I were sitting at a bar. Okay, that's not true, we were having lunch, but it would be such a better story if we were sitting at the bar. We were having lunch, and our conversation was dominated by our concern for our democracy, and we decided it was time to stop yelling at our TV sets and do something, do anything. So we began a conversation with the heads of the George and Barbara Bush Foundation, the LBJ Library Foundation, and the Clinton Library Foundation, and a few other groups along the way. Everybody wanted to help. The idea was to give people a chance to listen to experts who can talk about various sides of these issues. After all, every issue has various sides. And then give our audience a chance to ask questions, voice their concerns, and make their opinions known. No shouting, no name calling, no vitriol, just dialogue, civil dialogue. So far, we have talked about immigration at the Baker Institute and the LBJ Library, the importance of bipartisan partnerships at the Clinton Library. In a few weeks, we're going to talk about Israel, Gaza, and American foreign policy at the Bush School of Government and Public Service campus in Washington, D.C. That will be scary, but we're excited to do this. Among the invitations we already have for next year, we're going to partner with, we both went to University of Missouri School of Journalism. By the way, Mizzou is in the top 10 of football. That was obnoxious, sorry. But we're never in the top of anything. Anyway, we're gonna partner with Mizzou School of Journalism to talk about the importance of the media and our constitutional democracy. And here we are today to have a civil dialogue about one of the most important issues of our time, climate change. On that note, I will turn this over to my partner. Linda Laurel is an Emmy award-winning journalist who anchored the evening news at Houston's NBC affiliate, KPRC-TV, for nearly 17 years. Today, she is CEO and executive producer of Linda Laurel Media, a video production and communications consulting team. Linda, it's all yours.
Everybody, thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Jean, for all that you do. It is really wonderful working with you. So, your presence here today indicates your commitment to moving us toward an energy future that preserves this beautiful planet we are entrusted with caring for, and an energy future that works for all of its inhabitants. Every single one of us is part of the solution, but in order to get to that solution, we have to be willing to go there. And by that, I mean we have to be willing to talk with those on the other side, those who see things differently than we do, those who disagree with us on the best path toward a low-carbon future. Now, later on in the program, you will have a chance to literally practice how to have those difficult conversations about this topic and others. And you'll also have an opportunity to engage in questions and answers with our panelists. None of this is easy. It's hard. We get it. But here in Houston, the energy capital, as you have heard many times already this morning, we do hard things. So what do you say we get to work? It is time now to bring up our panelists as we consider these questions. What will it take to get us to a low-carbon future? And how do we ensure a just transition? Our first panelist is Carl Peterson. Carl is president of Peterson Analytics, LLC, which has developed the market's first comprehensive decoder ring between sustainability and corporate finance. Carl has spent more than 25 years on Wall Street as a recognized researcher and advisor to Fortune 100 companies, and was also recently Chief Sustainability Officer for a major investment bank. Please welcome Carl Peterson. You've already met her, Juliana Garazar, our co-chair of Houston Energy and Climate Week. Juliana is a climate leader, VC, and an angel with a global career in Asia, Europe, and LATAM, where she has created and grown innovation ecosystems. A diversity champion, she creates funds and instruments to bridge the gender and race gaps in investing. Juliana, thank you. Theo Wilson is a community activist, poet, journalist, actor, and host of I Was There on the History Channel. He has many TED Talks, but one in particular about race in America has been viewed 18 million times. If you have not watched it, you must. Please welcome Theo Wilson. Pat Wood III is past chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, and of the Public Utility Commission of Texas. Today, as CEO of the Hunt Energy Network, Pat and his team are shaping the dependable, decarbonized, democratized, decentralized, diverse, and digitalized future of the power grid. Please welcome Pat Wood. Okay, I am delighted to be here with all of you. Thank you so much. So we've got a lot to get to. And I want to start by posing this question to each one of you. I'd like to get your individual perspectives on what part of this conversation about energy, climate, transition, what are we missing? What should we be talking about that is not at the forefront of the public discourse? And Carl, I'm going to start with you.
Sure, thank you. A pleasure to be here. Nice to see everybody. From my perspective, and certainly in the work that I do, you know, I start with the view that what sets us apart as humans is that we're storytellers, right? And we tell stories all day long about ourselves a lot, about other people. And certainly sustainability broadly and the response to climate change, I think, is one of the greatest stories we can tell. We're just telling it wrong right now. So when you look at the way it tends to be articulated, whether it's you know, in the mainstream consciousness or at policymaker levels or corporate America or even the NGO community, these are very different lexicons. They're very different languages that don't talk to each other, that tend to try to punish other factions, right? So it's not a civil dialogue in many cases. And it's not surprising either because, you know, this is a conversation we've never really had before. So we're making up the conversation as we go along, but we're also trying to make up the language of it. And so what we really need, in my view, is a true decoder ring to reconcile all these different languages. And when you do the math and you look at, you know, who ultimately needs to figure out how to do this, who needs to do the hard work in the math, a lot of it comes down to the private sector, right? So a lot of it is the private sector has to solve these equations. And so when you look at, again, corporate America, a lot of these companies are heavily financialized, right? So you need to find, the only way you get there is you need to find the decoder ring, the key that's going to make a CFO able to speak directly to a climate response in a language that he understands, that his teams understand, and quite frankly also that can make it as a story, you know, genuinely emotionally resonant.
Can you give me an example? Can you give us an example of that, of what you mean?
Yeah, so I guess one of the ways to think about it is, you know, we're in an environment right now where carbon is being priced one way or the other, whether we like it or not. So the Inflation Reduction Act has a nascent carbon pricing component to it. Europe is introducing its carbon border tax, all that kind of stuff. What happens the second that you price carbon is that your stock of emissions becomes economically indistinguishable from a large unfunded liability, and a liability that you've committed to pay down to zero. right? Which no company ever really pays down its liabilities to zero, you refinance. So that gives you a lens all of a sudden where, as a finance team, you know how to manipulate this. You know how to act on these kinds of concepts. And if you pull on these threads, you see as well that if you're in a net zero scenario, but you rely on offsets to get there, for example, offsets become economically indistinguishable from paying 100% interest on your liability. So it becomes financial madness. So very quickly you start to be able to rationalize and to corral these different concepts into a way that starts to solve for carbon and cost together, right? And optimize all these curves together. And that gives you the kinds of investment pathways, the kind of technologies that you need to invest in, which is probably different from what your sustainability teams have talked about and committed to the markets. Your targets are going to look different, but they're going to be powerful. It's going to give you measures of returns. It's going to give you a true lexicon to talk to investors, and quite frankly, to lead the way. So
Juliana, you live in the investment world as well. So you want to pick up on what Carl had to say and just tell us from your perspective, what are we missing in this conversation?
Yeah, I have to agree. For the past 10 years, I've been working on open innovation. I really believe that that's what Houston needs. A lot of the innovation, and by the way, Houston is the engineering capital of the world. There's no more engineers per square feet than anywhere else, even Silicon Valley. But all of the innovation so far has been behind closed doors. If we are going to solve this huge problem, it's all about open innovation. And a lot of the big corporates are not used to that. And that's why I dedicated most of my career to create those open innovation hubs where people can collaborate. We have been collaborating a lot in terms of science and commercialization of innovation, getting them to market. I think we've done a good job at bringing things that are in universities like U of H, where we're here today, to accelerators, incubators, hubs. But there's still so many other valleys of death. You know, in Silicon Valley, there's only one valley of death when you have a software company, and that's when you need money from venture capital or private investors like angels, private equity. When you're doing hard tech, you have 5 different valleys of death. And I don't think anyone so far has been used to try to fill in those areas. So yes, venture capital is good for the first valley of death. That leads you to something that is a proof of concept. But what happens when you have to put a first of a kind plant that has never been done before? That has a very different kind of risk than the venture capital risk. The venture capital risk is for software companies where you have 5 years to market maximum. What happens when you have to create a pilot plan and then yet another plan, when you have engineering risk and then you have assets to manage, then you have project finance. So all of this capital stack is in a continuum, but VCs are not used to work with these partners that come in later. Then there's a lot of money that comes from funds that can be public, like IRA, grants, SBIR, STTR, the Loan Programs Office. So there's another field altogether that I call innovation in finance that is key to be able to solve this big problem, or decarbonization. So it's not only about the science and investing in innovation or innovating, but it's also about innovating in finance. As we mentioned, what are the finance vehicles that are going to allow us to bring the whole capital stack, not only from VC to the rest, but it's for the whole, like when you have several big factories that are in hydrogen or anything that, we're talking here about billions invested, right? And that is the big difference, and that's where we need all the minds, all the experts in carbon trading, in offsetting, the lawyers, all working together to try to figure this out. We have companies at Energy Tech Nexus that have figured out the rest of the capital stack. So they have already gotten the offsets approved. They have a pre-approved loan from the Loan Programs Office from the DOE. They have everything except for the first 15 to 20 million. And everybody, when they talk to JP Morgan or other banks, they're like, oh, we're very ready
to help you when you get through that hurdle, right? The first one, when you have your first proof of concept, when you have your first pilot. But what happens before that?
What happens
right?
before that, right.
And that's where we become creative.
Yeah.
And in our case, for Energy Tech Nexus, we stopped thinking about incubation only, and now we're really focusing on innovation finance, trying to figure out how we can help with that first initial part of the capital stack, because it's kind of a domino effect. Once that first part, the rest comes in. And also how to live with what we call pilot hell, you know? There's a chicken and egg problem where a lot of our companies need to demonstrate that the technology works out of the bench and in a real world environment, but they also need money for that. So, you know, you don't have money to fund the pilot, but if you don't have a pilot, you cannot get funded.
And then you go round and round.
So we're becoming very creative at that too, and we have created these sandboxes where people can pilot their technologies outside of big corporations so that it's easier.
So the investment piece is obviously innovation within that needs to happen. So and obviously the money needs to be there. So let's talk a little bit now about the human piece. And Theo, one of the reasons that we invited you to be on the panel is that you're such a champion for this. So talk a little bit about, from your perspective, as it relates to the impact on humans that this transition is going to have for all of us. What is it that you think is missing from the conversation that we need to be thinking about and talking about?
Yeah, I say don't forget the hood, period.
Don't forget the hood.
Don't forget the hood. And what I mean by that is these grand designs that have got environmental injustice looking the way it looks now was on purpose. Let us disabuse ourselves of the idea that underprivilege just happened that way. I'm from a neighborhood that was redlined into existence and then polluted because of the cycles of poverty that redlining created. There's a big old Alpo dog food factory that we are downwind of. Not only that, but we were near the airports that just dropped smog on us. So close to the runways you could see the rivets on the wings and the tread on the tires, driving property values down, and increasing the likelihood that I would encounter what I did encounter, which was gang activity growing up. All the kids had inhalers, and the homies of mine who did not die in street life ended up dying early because of liver disease, kidney problems, lead poisoning, you name it. And so when we move into this bright, shiny green future, whether or not you are truthful in your efforts to clean up your act will be seen by these people. Don't be surprised if their cynicism bursts your bubble, because this is the true environmental impact of how we built the world up today. And when you bring this up, sometimes people get upset. When you talk about things like environmental racism, when you talk about things like redlining, people like to dismiss you and call you woke. I say, I ain't woke, it's just what happened. It's just what happened. We're not gonna throw these words around. When you change this map of how poverty and pollution are intertwined, we'll know. Please include us, don't forget us. That's what I'll say.
So you mentioned, You mentioned redlining. There's a really wonderful film that I actually had hoped to show you guys and share with you today, but in the interest of time and wanting to make sure that we have an opportunity for everyone to have their voices heard, there's a QR code we can put up on the screen that will take you to this film. It's called A Just Transition, and it was produced by Rational Middle Energy. And it talks about what it's going to take for a just transition, and it gets into a little bit of the history of redlining and what Theo was just talking about. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, and we'll put the QR code back up there again. But I urge you to watch that film because it gives you a good framework for all of the topics and the points of view that we need to be considering as we move in this direction. Pat, you obviously, you didn't have a mic in your chair?
No, ma'am.
Oh, okay. You know what? Here, you can have this one. Okay, here you go. That's for me later, but there you go. So, okay, FERC and the PUC, and obviously you have been in the middle of all of this for most of your career. Tell us from your perspective what we should be thinking about and talking about that's not at the forefront of the conversation from where you sit.
Well, I'm going to leverage off what Theo said.
Please, go for it.
Back 25 years ago when Governor Bush wanted to open up the markets to competition, the main reason he said that is the utilities at the time cared more about what the government thought than what their customers thought. And he pointed at me and he said, and we're going to change that. And he hit me right here on the chest. So I was like, got the message. We asked in 18 kind of broken out groups, deliberative polling around the state, which is 2 or 3 days. People come in, they're randomly selected through whatever process. It was pioneered by a professor at the University of Texas. So being an Aggie, I had to swallow hard and admit that the Longhorns sometime come up with something better. But we had a pretty uniform message from a cross-section of Texas customers of all races and income levels and living situations, what they wanted out of their power system. And two of the things that rose to the top that kind of surprised me, this was 1998 or 97, was that people cared a lot more about energy efficiency and conservation. Texas, really? And they cared a lot more about renewable energy. This was, again, almost 30 years ago. So we formed our restructuring plan around that to make sure that we were democratized and that we started that move toward decarbonization, and we split up the utilities into a regulated part, which here in Houston we call CenterPoint. It's the wires company. They just deliver power. They don't own the power plants. They don't send you a retail bill. Their job is just to focus on the wires. We can talk about that. But the generation and the retailing, we said, let's get the entrepreneurs and the innovators in here so that everybody's involved. And so when I think about what Juliana said, that was just so important, that the most conservative industry in U.S. economic history, the utility industry, got asked to focus on what was truly a monopoly and to get out of the way of everything else. So let's let the flowers bloom. So Texas really has become kind of ground zero for all this innovation. And one of the great ones that honestly, I didn't think, we put it in there. We said, let's have some renewable energy, throw out a big welcome mat. We're now the number 5 nation in the world for renewable electricity, wind, solar, batteries. Those are clean, those put jobs to work. They use foreign-made equipment, a lot of them, so we're a global economy. We're not unplugging from that world, but it's been a phenomenal change. It's a lot more to come. We went from solar energy just from nothing before COVID to about 25% of our whole fleet now at the peak of the afternoon is from solar. So it's just a stunning shock. But when you get out of the way and you let innovators innovate, that's been a real win for this state. And what's ironic in the state where the energy transition or climate change isn't talked about too much, if at all, well, it is being talked about, thank God, today. We're probably going to be setting the model for the rest of the world because we're moving there so fast. We've tripped and fall, as you saw during Winter Storm Uri. The competitive generation fleet froze up, and so that was a failing on the part of regulators to set the minimum standards. And I, again, have sleepless nights over that, Linda.
So I'm really glad you brought up Uri because I want to talk about that and of course the grid, right? We all have a vested interest in the grid as somebody who spent quite a bit of time without power in the not too distant past. Okay, I want to share with you a quick quote from an article that Ed Hers wrote, and Ed was going to be joining us today and had a family emergency and wasn't able to be here. And Pat knows this is not a gotcha moment. This is not me playing an investigative journalist. Pat knows that I am going to ask this question, but this is a quote from Ed's article, and I want to get everybody's kind of take on this, starting with you, Pat. Texas's state-managed electricity grid is failing at every step of the electricity supply chain. The most recent examples being the freeze of 2021, that would be Uri, and the collapse in Houston following Hurricane Beryl. There is no incentive to invest, he writes. There is incentive to not invest. Companies all along the supply chain, including renewable energy providers, profit from gaming the system at the expense of hundreds of lives and billions of dollars. So, what do you think about that?
The incentive to invest, obviously you do have to have a profit incentive. Utilities had that under regulation. The current companies have it now. But you've got to do it within the boundaries of the rules. And I think Theo pointed out a great example where the rules in the old world, that great regulated world that everybody said was much better, really misserved people. They plopped power plants in the poor neighborhoods. They plopped transmission lines and tore up graveyards. I mean, those kind of things have happened under the old system. But I think the grid did let people down. I lose sleep over the 200 people that died because I didn't put in place in 2001 a minimum standard that in winter you've got to be insulated to not to 20 degrees but to 0 degrees. We went down to 5 and 8 degrees down in West Texas. Those kind of things sound kind of nerdy, but they save lives. So we didn't put that in there because, quite frankly, we had so many extra power plants at that time. Everybody came to Texas to invest because they wanted to try to make money. It was so competitive that they didn't. But for 20 years, we had excess capacity. The grid, I think there is an incentive to invest. Quite frankly, it's a pretty good business, as has been pointed out in local journalism, that utilities get a nice big return on every dollar they put into capital investment. So the question is, are they putting it in the right place? And that's what's before the government right now. I think there'll be a lot of inquiry there is already inquiry in the Texas legislature about not only CenterPoint, but all the utilities in Texas. Do we have them positioned for the 21st century? That model worked pretty good in the 20th century to deliver reliable power to customers at a reasonable price, but is that going to work in going forward anymore? I think a lot of Houstonians would probably say no, it needs a change.
And I think part of the conversation needs to be also how does the government regain the trust of the citizens, right? Because, I mean, I truthfully, I don't really have trust that the next big storm, we're going to be without power again. I fully expect it. You know, we bought a generator. You know, fortunately, we're able to do that, but most people are not. Theo, jump in, please.
Yeah, what happened to the communities wasn't regulation, it was racism. The government just happened to be racist at the time and could openly get away with it. There's this idea that the market will govern itself and fix everything. I think that is a form of American fundamentalism as crazy as jihadism. The evidence right in front of you. The evidence is in your lights when they go off. Us in Colorado, we looking at Texas like, what y'all doing down there? Like, you let private companies get a hold of your grid and wonder why corner-cutting motives made it inefficient? There go your market inefficiency right there. When you have a public good unaccountable to the public, expect more of the same, because necessarily in the profit motive is cutting corners, and that's all right. That's all right, right? We all hear, like this isn't like a blanket critique of capitalism in general, but it do need to be balanced out by something that is socially responsible. And when we see things like this, I think that it's the universe screaming, hey, red flashing sign, what you did before ain't working. And so let's take what works from both models, the one that's private and the one that's public, and evolve it to where they both work in partnership. But I think that just handing it over to private companies has proven what it is. And let's just look at the evidence and guide our next decisions based on what broke.
Juliana, I saw you shaking your head in agreement there. Please, go ahead.
So I come from Europe, and we have a welfare state, sometimes I can see things, you know, when you have a system, everybody rigs it, whatever it is, you know. The rules are made and suddenly someone tries to profit from the rules. There's always a loophole. A lot of people live out of welfare states in Europe. You know, they take advantage of the system, they don't work because they have a lot of subsidies. I'm aware of that, but you know, the things that we lived here during all of this harvest barrel, where people died, one of the members of our hub lost her 2 kids and her mom because she used a fireplace to heat themselves, and then of course carbon monoxide happened and she woke up without her kids and her mom, you know. Tragedy is real. We need to figure out a way to make sure that we have this hybrid model where not everything is welfare state, but I mean, the things that have happened here, I mean, when you talk to my European friends, it's like, this is third world. It looks like it is third world. How can it be that we are capable of the most amazing things, like putting men in the moon, curing cancer, all of these great things, and still we are not able to keep our people safe? And I think there's this hybrid model that Theo talks about, where if you put the incentives right, and you know, you try to figure out what the voluntary carbon markets are doing and try to reinforce putting laws that are going to benefit everybody, so that finally all the incentives work in the same way. And that's when I'm telling that innovation in finance is key, because if you put the right incentives, the right price of carbon, we're all going to head towards the same direction. And now we are benefit from very short-term gains that are actually putting a huge toll on future generations. And only finance can figure out the way where we are not burdening future generations with huge expenses, huge risks that, you know, not even the insurers can account for, just because we are thinking only about short-term gains.
Carl, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with everything that's been said. Let me give you my own kind of finance lens on it. First, I think, yes, there's been altogether way too much magical thinking around markets, right? We believe markets are these magical, self-replicating unicorns that are going to solve the world. They're not, right? Markets result from regulation, they result from legislation, they result from history, from behavior, all these kinds of things. And we're in a situation, and I think where Ed Hurst's article was pointing to a degree is all these conversations, including the finance and the market conversation, are very, very reductive, right? So you reduce any sense of value to 1 or 2 metrics that you tell the world solve for everything, right? And so in the financial world, it's become about value and value creation. The problem you have is that very quickly you get into a situation where people extract value. It's value extraction that masquerades as value creation. And I think this is part of the issue we've seen with the grid. This is the way, you know, corporations are also criticized for, you know, fomenting and contributing to inequality, all that kind of stuff. Now, when we talk about climate, there's, I agree, the incentives need to change. There's a large body of economic research that does point very persuasively to the fact that ultimately what you need is, you need to price carbon one way or the other, right? You need some form of carbon taxation, some form of carbon pricing. The question then becomes, as a policymaker, why would you do it? Because who's going to campaign on higher taxes, right? But where I have a lot of hope is when, and this is conversations that I also have in DC with a number of policymakers, when you look at the energy transition conversation globally today, what it becomes is that it starts to transcend ideology, right? It becomes a conversation around diversifying energy sources, diversifying supply chains, and the creation of new centers of influence that quite frankly are attempting to move away from, you know, dollarized oil and gas, which is what we have today. So the US has to compete right? And to the extent that you can price carbon, there's also a place in there where maybe you dollarize carbon as well, and you really actively participate in the creation of these markets that then starts to feed into all the right incentives and then starts to move the conversation forward. So even the finance lens, which can be reductive and cynical and partial, when you really pull on these threads, ultimately gets you to that conversation. And the one thing I wanted to add here too on the social justice side of it is that then also opens up the way for, the moment you start cracking that nut of extracting value versus creating value, which is a conversation starting to happen, then you start to question a lot of behaviors like, share buybacks that serve no purpose other than enriching,
Right.
small cadre investors and redistributing the kind of the profitability differently and things like that.
Okay, everybody's gonna have a chance, but I really want to bring the audience in right now. I need to take your mic since I gave up that one, and will need to share, okay? I want to come down and get the audience involved in this conversation a little bit. And my question for all of you is, what are you willing to give up, right? What are we as citizens and consumers of energy who want our energy when we want it and when we need it, what are we willing to give up to get to a low carbon future? How do we educate ourselves and others about energy usage? Where does it come from? How do we use it on a daily basis that impacts the planet? So I want you to be thinking about that. And if anybody has a quick question, Pat, go ahead. What were you going to say?
So,
Raise your hand.
lest markets take such a hit, the nice thing about clean energy is the two cheapest forms of generating electricity today are wind and solar. So if you want market forces to work, get out of the way and the good guys win. They've shut down, all the coal plants went from 40-something% of our fleet down to 17 last month. Gas has stayed flat all the time. Gas is nice. We got a lot of it here. It's a whole lot cleaner than coal. So we've got that filling in, but coal took it in the shorts as wind and solar filled up the thing. And so as we go forward, just remember that, when our goal is clean, cheap, and reliable, we got cleaner than we've ever been, than anybody ever dreamed we could be. We went way down as far as cost of electricity down to one of the lowest 5 states in the nation. Dependability, we took a black eye, both on the regulated side and on the competitive side.
Okay.
That's our work.
Okay. All right. It's your question or comment.
Sure. So to answer your question of what am I willing to give up, I guess comfort. 1 degree higher temperature in the summer, 1 degree lower in the winter, same as Europe and Canada, can make a huge difference. And I guess individuals can just do that right off the bat.
All right. Willing to give up that 1 degree? Good. Anybody else have a question, comment for our panelists?
Good morning. I'm sorry. My name is James Lee, and 20 years ago, I sit at the ASTM E56 as a subcommittee on nanotechnology standard for the United States, and my committee is involved in environmental issues and occupational health. Since then, I have developed a few technology in nanotech. And what I can give up, one of them, is I call nanogel. What I want to be bold about it is, since I travel in the past 20 years throughout the world to expand the knowledge of nanotech, I have seen the global warming actually affecting many underdeveloping countries, and also here, Houston, and elsewhere.
So do you have a question, sir?
My question is, what can we give up as a scientific community? And what we can do is create technology. And I'm willing to give up my nanogel for the world, because the benefit of it is, with my technology, you don't use any energy except from the sun source, UV light, that will activate and capture.
Okay. Sir, I'm sorry, but I really do want to get some other folks involved. I don't want this to be just okay, what, last comment.
Yes, it will capture the CO2, and that will solve a lot of problems, including agriculture.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes.
Yes, hi, my name is Zachary Hanna. This is not on behalf of my company, IBM. It's a personal question. So what do you think about the feedback loop of demand management? Do you see that being helpful in the future to give us back that 1 degree, or to tell people's cars not to charge from this time to this time or something? I saw one provider doing an octopus, but I'm not sure if you're seeing any other market forces or initiatives for this effort.
Who wants to take that? Pat, you probably are the one who can answer that.
You know, for years, and even in the current proposals from all the competitors, it's a flat rate year-round. That doesn't track the cost. The cost, like right now when the sun's in West Texas, pretty high, is about as cheap. You should actually charge your car in the middle of the day now. That's changed from 4 years ago when you should charge in the middle of the night because all the wind power is dumping on the grid. But time of use pricing matters a lot. That's why people get the incentive. You're not going to get the incentive to be 1 degree cooler in your house in the winter, which did kind of drive us off the edge because everybody had their heaters on 24 hours a day because it was so cold. We're not going to get that if it's 10 cents an hour, 10 cents a kilowatt hour throughout the whole day. If it's 50 cents at night, then that's going to wake you up and say, I need to drop it 5 degrees. But, you know, at some stage that becomes really tedious. But we do have to move to that where people understand the value. Just like when you look at groceries, there's drought in Canada, well, the price of bread went up. So there's a linkage between what the real cost is. That's what...
Okay, thank you. We have a question here.
I have a question. I was wondering about how do you educate people, because Houston is not a very friendly, renewable energy place. It isn't, especially in social media. So how do you go about educating people to thinking it's not about, and my argument always is not about today. We're not talking about stuff that's happening today. We're talking about the future and our children and their children's children, right? So how do you educate people, especially here in Houston, Texas, where everybody's like, you know, gas, we have to use it. They're not very friendly to other sources. I mean, how do you go about educating the normal folks out there on this is something that we need to think about?
Juliana, you want to take that one?
Yeah. There's a lot of companies out there, some of them are, of course, in my Climate Hub, that are actually educating on the impact of your carbon footprint. I think one of the things we forget is that 50% of the energy, electricity that is generated right now is wasted. It's not even used. So can you imagine if we were really working on the demand side of things and on the energy efficiencies thing, instead of just trying to, all of the projections are about how much growth the population and the markets and the AI are going to have and how to tend to that future demand. But we never think about how to use everything we are actually producing much more efficiently. Quite a few of our companies are trying that route, saying like, okay, if we were in total control, like we have a Fitbit tracker, anything about our health is trackable now. If we were in full control of our carbon footprint, I think a lot of things we would do it a very different way. And there's a few companies out there that have started to do that, like Footprint app or Spirit. Spirit is more for commercial buildings that are tracking, and they are gamifying the way you bring down your carbon footprint. And as Pat mentioned about going to the groceries and knowing exactly what kind of food you bring in, how many calories, whether it's fair trade or not, just by having information of that sort would really empower us to think a lot more about our present, but also about our future.
Thank you, Juliana. What's your question?
Hi, I'm William Hidders. I'm actually with Physicus Biosolutions, one of the startup companies with the Energy Tech Nexus. I guess there was a mentioning about sometimes oversimplification, and I guess we talk a lot about the carbon footprint, But there's other footprints out there. And I'm talking about the water footprint. I'm talking about the critical minerals footprint, things like, for example, lithium, copper. One thing that not many people know, but actually we as a global civilization, we're running out of sand. Sand, it's equal to SiO2, silicon dioxide, which is what we make photovoltaics and chips out of. So I would love to hear your opinion about these multidimensional issues that we're facing, which are beyond just carbon.
Thank you. Beyond carbon. Carl?
Yes, completely agree with you. I think what's happening is, as we were saying earlier, you know, in a lot of these conversations, we're trying to figure out communally what the conversation looks like and what the language needs to look like. So carbon, I think, gathers a lot of attention because it's the first place where there's some sort of usable measure that was put in place, right? So tons of CO2 emitted per year. But you extend it to other things, and once you start getting even into biodiversity, it's very hard to understand exactly what you're looking at, what you're measuring, what you have to act on. Water and sand, and these things are somewhere in between that spectrum. I think what'll happen, my guess is what'll happen is you start with carbon and you start to harness that conversation, and it naturally starts to open the way into other things. My personal sense right now is that where we'll really feel the crunch is much more on water, right? There's a lot of policy out there saying, you know, so-and-so wants to be the leader in green hydrogen production for the world. There isn't enough water currently to be able to do that. So the entire energy transition conversation touches on a lot of these other topics necessarily by virtue of the resources that need to be put in place. So the more we actually do the math and the hard work of the math, the more these things are going to start to emerge. But I think simply put, carbon is where we're starting, and it's, you know, quite frankly, the world has limited bandwidth to absorb and absorb and absorb and define the rest of that information. So I think we'll get there, but in concentric circles.
And rely on the numbers. It's always in the math, isn't it? For those of us who don't like math, that's a real problem. Speaking for myself only. Yes, sir.
Thank you. This is kind of a half question, spurred on by the prior question about footprint, especially with replacement, or I guess if we look at oil and gas replacements or phasing outs. There's a lot of talk, as you said, beyond carbon, not as much talk about the impact of rare minerals and a lot of the materials that go into production of whether it's solar panels, wind turbines, etc. A lot of these come from say non-developed countries or less developed, second, third world, or fill in the blanks. I feel like there isn't enough talk or chatter even about that, especially from a, speaking of equity development standpoint. And yeah, I'd like to know your perspective, the rest of the panel as well. I feel like there isn't much talk about that at all in panels like these, but being in Houston, I think we'll probably have a better shot of hearing answers, intelligible answers as well. So,
Thank you for bringing that up. Who wants to take that? Go, Theo.
You're right. Congo is in abject slavery right now, getting us these minerals for our Teslas, period. And that took a long time to do. The supply routes to get all this extraction, whether it be from Seco Mines or Glencore, whether it be, you know, these folks who are descendants, ultimately, of those who colonized the Congo, whether it be the uranium that was in the Manhattan Project, came from the Shinkolobwe mine in the Congo, right? Has us take a look at the history of our supply chains, which has us take a look at history, which be getting weird, especially now, right? And this needs to be confronted and remedied. And there are people working on this problem right now. Katie and I sat on a panel with a gentleman who's working to source ethically not only the minerals that we need for these batteries, but make sure that when we are dealing with places like the Congo, they're actually getting fair market price. If not, there will be revolution, like there already is in certain other places in Africa, like Burkina Faso. So the whole problem is that we got this giant blind spot here in America about how the sausage is made including the new one we're trying to make. And that's going to be remedied when we actually take a look at what's really going on and disabuse ourselves. What do we have to give up? Our illusions. What do we have to give up? Our idea of exceptionalism. You know what I'm saying? What do we have to give up? That this was all gotten clean with work ethic. Nah, this is part of an extractive machine, and it doesn't have to be that way. First step is to depersonalize it. It ain't personal. You ain't do it. You know what I'm saying? You weren't there when the Congo was being conquered by King Leopold. You weren't there in transatlantic slave trade. You didn't do that. Now, let's separate our identity from the actions that need to be taken. We've inherited this machine. Let's take a look at it. First step is to look at it, to see it. The distance between the minds and your iPhone. And then say, how do we do this better? There are people working on that problem right now. And I'll just say this in conclusion. It's a big ship. It took 500 years to get this ship going in this direction. It's going to take a long time to get this routed in a more sustainable and humane direction. We are planting trees whose shade we will not live to rest under, period. But once we see, once we look, and once we take account of how it got here, then we can do that. But like you got to bring attention to it in the first place, you know? Yeah.
Thank you, Theo. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Yes, I wanted to follow up on Mr. Day's question about the inequities for marginalized communities. My question is, it's a two-part question. First question is, Mr. Wood, I know you're the former FERC commissioner. My question to you particularly is, since the legislative session is coming up next year, what are your thoughts on how we can focus on the Texas grid? What policy solutions can you give? What action items, because you know, with Texas people, we get things done. So what action items do you want to see at the legislature? And then secondly, to Mr. Theo, my question to you is, when we have marginalized communities being polluted and things like that, how do we bring them to the table in the sense that, what are things that they need? Do they need more parks? Do they need more community centers? Do they need more water purification, like Mr. Sorry, I forgot your name, Mr. Carr talked about, to desalinate the water that we're going to need to help the world make a better, continue to grow. So what are things that you think they should ask for?
Great question. Okay.
So I'll do the quick one.
Why don't you go first, Pat?
Texas legislature, what should it do? I think what happened here in Houston after the derecho and barrel is a great advertisement for let's decentralize power into the neighborhoods, into the poor neighborhoods and the rich ones both, and look at microgrids. Look at the stability and the strength and the resilience that comes from not just depending on the big central network, but pushing it out to all the corners of the grid. I think that's a good first step. That takes, as Theo just used a great analogy, that's planting a tree that we won't see the shade for. But I do sense that the resilience comes from the entire grid being strong, not just these great big plants in the middle pushing it out to everybody.
Theo?
Every community is different. My community needs somebody to take a look at the air pollution. But if you live in Cancer Alley or here in the Cancer Belt, you got to look at clean water. That's an immediate need. So if I live in Flint, Michigan, that's an immediate need, right? Please clean the water. Please figure out how come, you know, these chemicals are falling into our soil. And so you really have to ask them and bring them to the table and see them. The second thing is the long-term needs. Like right now, speaking of Cancer Alley, how many of y'all have heard of Cancer Alley? Okay, a few of y'all have. Just to break it down, it's an 85-mile stretch of communities in Louisiana who happen to have a lot of polluters just near them. Somebody drew the map and they was like, put it here next to the black communities. Oh, and they have cancer, right? So what do they need? Legislation that takes a look at it from the lens of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The problem is, and by the way, that breaks it down in terms of like, there was actually discrimination that made this happen. The problem is that there's a judge who was appointed by our former president who blocked that from happening. There was a judge who literally said, we know it's Cancer Alley, but we will not look at this from the lens of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Try something else. We need that to stop. because 23 other conservative governors, now I hate to make it political, but this is just what the facts are falling, are trying to duplicate this so that we don't look at what environmental pollution does. So in the short term, we need needs met. In the long term, we need legislative structures that acknowledge the need and how the need got there and work for long-term solutions centering the needs of that community.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move on to the next section, and I'm going to ask you to, first of all, thank our panelists for speaking honestly and for speaking what's in their hearts and from their perspective and their knowledge. And I'm going to invite, first of all, give them a round of applause. And I'm going to invite our panelists to come into the audience and join us on the round tables, because you can start coming on down as I read this next part here. So one of the hallmarks of a Civil Dialogues town hall is providing an opportunity for the audience to practice how to have a difficult conversation. So we've seen some different opinions here, and some of it might have made some of you uncomfortable. Maybe, maybe not. But the point is, these are hard topics, and we have to figure out how we have conversations about them. This is time now for all of you in the room and those of you online to literally roll up your sleeves and just do that. Our partners at Living Room Conversations have conversation guides designed to help us practice skills like listening, empathy, and curiosity that facilitate the kind of united efforts we hope to achieve around energy and the environment. You've got these guides on your tables. We're going to have some small group discussions. This will be an abbreviated conversation of about 25 to 30 minutes of what is typically a 90-minute conversation. So this is shorter, but it's going to give you a taste of how to use these skills as you go forward. Please take a look at your guides. We're going to go over the conversation agreements. And if you're at a table by yourself, please go to a table with other people. You need to be at a table with other people in order for this to work. So, the first thing to do, be curious and listen to understand. Conversation is as much about listening as it is about talking. Show respect and suspend judgment. Note any common ground as well as any differences. Be authentic and welcome that from others. Be purposeful and to the point, and own and guide the conversation. And now for our online audience, I'm pleased to introduce to you Becca Curl from Living Room Conversations, who will give you a brief orientation and send you into breakout rooms for this engaging activity. Now, for those of you here in the room with me, at your tables, you've got a conversation guide to follow. I ask that someone at each table volunteer to be a timekeeper and help to host the conversation using the italicized language on the guide. So one person at each table volunteer to be the host. The structure of the conversation includes timed responses as well as more free-flowing conversation. In each question round, you have 1 to 2 minutes to answer a question without interruption. The host will keep time, volunteer host will keep time, will give you a wrap-it-up signal to finish your thought. These questions will invite you to share your experiences over your opinions, and that is important. I will be keeping an eye on the time and will let you know when you should move between the different segments. Do your best to keep the conversation agreements in mind and share again from your experience. And then we'll get back together again as a large group for just a couple of minutes of takeaways before we move on to the next panel. Okay, everybody have a host? That host should start reading the italicized language, and round 1 should begin right now. 2 minutes to finish round one. 2 minutes to finish round one of your introductions. Okay, your introductions should be complete. Move to round two. You should be on round two now. We're wrapping up in 2 minutes. This is your final 2 minutes. Okay, I know that you haven't had time to completely finish all of the questions, but I do hope that you've had an opportunity to kind of see how this works. There is another panel right after this, so we do need to end on time. I would like to ask if there's anyone, if one person from one of the tables has a takeaway that you'd like to share from this process, anything over the last hour and a half or so, anything that you'd like to share that you will take with you when you leave here today so that you can continue to have conversations about difficult topics. I'll hold it for you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. My name is Karen Sheffield. I'm founder and managing partner of Pachamama Ventures. We're an early stage firm, VC firm that invests in climate technology companies. I think one of the most important takeaways, at least new information for me, and I'm in the field, is that the U.S. is a net bigger exporter of oil now. And I did not know that, on petroleum. And my friend here, Lafayette, next to me, is the one who said that stat, right? Like, the tables flipped. We used to use a lot of petroleum and oil in our own country and now we're an independent energy.
So you learned something from this conversation.
Yeah, there's a lot of action to be taken from that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I wish we had more time. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. Please go to that QR code, and which will take you to civildialogues.us. That is our website. Please follow what we're doing. Please come to another one of our town halls, either here in Houston or another part of the country if you happen to be there. Follow us on social media and spread the word. We really believe that the work that we're doing right here on the ground level, human to human, having conversations, talking about difficult issues, is a critical piece of what it's going to take for us to get where we want to be as a democracy. And certainly this conversation about energy and climate could not be any more important. It literally is about our future, our children and our grandchildren's future, and the planet. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Katie, Juliana, Lindsay, and everyone at Houston Energy and Climate Week for putting this incredible platform together. Have a great day and enjoy the next panel.
So how was that? Oh, I can't hear you. How was it? How did it feel to talk about something that was hard in a civil way? Did anybody get in any fights? Okay, good. You know, we jokingly said this, but Houston Energy and Climate Week, when we wrote the Unity commitment, we actually said we want to bring diverse perspectives to the room. And I actually had somebody from New York call me and say, so are there going to be activists down there going to glue their hands on the wall? You know, we're going to throw some tomatoes? No, not down here in Texas. Down here in Texas, we do things a little differently. So, well, our next panel is going to be a lot of energy. I'm really excited. We actually have some wonderful people who have dedicated their lives to resiliency and building community resilience as well as infrastructure here in Houston. Last night we had the opportunity to meet the Colonel Blackman, who is the head of the Galveston District of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is the agency, the federal agency that works to build infrastructure here in Houston to keep us from flooding. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're also going to talk with some folks from the city. We also have someone from here, from our wonderful school here at University of Houston, and a good friend of mine who is the former CEO of 7-Eleven and Blockbuster. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panel. They'll come up and sit down and we'll get our conversation started. So the first is Angela Blanchard. She is the Chief Recovery and Resilience Officer for the City of Houston. I just got her from her car. She was changing from her emergency management suit to her resilience suit. So please welcome Angela. Next is Jim Keys. He's the former Chief Executive Officer of Blockbuster and 7-Eleven. He'll be on today's panel, but also doing our keynote address on Friday. So Jim. Kelly Burks-Copes, PhD. She's the Chief Program Support Branch, Mega Projects Division at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Galveston. And we've got Dr. Ramanan Krishnamurti, Vice President of Energy and Innovation with the University of Houston. Cougs! All right, well, let's get started. How you doing, Angela? Should I pick on you first? Sure. All right. Well, I'd love to pick on you, except I don't have my the right cards here. But so I'm going to wing it. I know you all very well. So, Angela, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your role with the city? But more importantly, when I look at your website, you have this thing that says "Born for Storms." So why don't you tell us a little bit more about that, but then also tell us why did you come here today? Because you are in the middle of emergency management, and I'd love to know how you're able to balance these two things.
So thank you and I came here because of Katie and her commitment to the work that she does, and I've watched her evolve and watched her gather others to focus on some things that are incredibly important. So this morning, I'm basically, is it morning? It is morning. So I've been, you lose, in emergency management, we really lose track of time because everything is immediate. So this morning I have two brains. One is on fire with the last 3 days of very intense preparation in the event that we were going to need to respond to another storm. Born for Storms, I grew up on the Gulf Coast in Beaumont, South Park, across the street from in the garden spot across the street from the mobile plant. And I've spent my whole life really focused on how we make systems work better for people. The role I have now is resilience and recovery, because those two are inextricably linked, and that the way we go about recovery really determines how well we can do in the next go around. So I know Katie has some questions for others and questions about resilience, so I'll hold off on the rest. But today I'm trying to call up that resilient side of my brain that thinks in systems, that's calmer, that reflects more, and that engages people more in the collaborative work that's necessary for us to have a truly resilient region.
Jim.
Katie.
So we have limited
did you
time
find
and
your cards?
attention. Why did you choose to be here and not Dallas, Texas?
I will surprise you with a story. I was actually, my first job was in Houston, Texas.
right.
And I moved down here from New York City. And it actually ties in well to the resilience story and the need for change and the need for knowledge, because when I applied for an internship, I was sitting at Columbia University in business school, and all these companies were interviewing, and Gulf Oil was interviewing Houston. And it said requirements, chemical engineer, electrical engineer, engineer. I was a poli-sci major. And I said, oh, what the heck, I want to go to Houston. So I applied for the job, and I sat down in the interview, and the guy said, what are you doing here? You're not an engineer. And I said, well, you got an hour, let's talk. And by the end of the interview, I convinced him that oil companies needed diversity of thought, and I represented that diversity. And it ended up leading to a full-time job with Gulf, and I was in the, they said, go back, finish your MBA, we'll give you a full-time opportunity. I ended up in the office of the chief financial officer doing M&A analysis as that industry, this is, I'm going to date myself now, 1980, first thing we looked at to try to diversify Gulf Oil, it's hard to even imagine, Barnum and Bailey circuits.
Okay.
Now, why they would look at that rather than other forms of energy is beyond me, but yeah, all the way back then, the company recognized the need to pivot and the need for resiliency. And I was thankfully part of that team that helped bring them a different way of thinking.
Awesome. Kelly?
I'm Kelly Burks-Copes. I work with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I've actually worked with them for 31 years. I'm a unicorn, if you want to say that. I'm a woman, older than 50, that's all I'm going to say, and an ecologist, not an engineer. In fact, one of the first research projects I ever undertook and published was on climate change and the impact on ecology. I'm the project manager now for the Coastal Texas Project, which is the largest ever undertaking of the Corps of Engineers in their 240-year history. And that project came about specifically because of Hurricane Ike, and it has to endure into the future under climate change.
Ramanai?
Katie, who could ever say no to you, right? So that was the first reason. As soon as Katie mentioned she's going to be doing this panel, I said, sign me up, right?
And at the University of Houston.
At the University of Houston. So welcome to all of you to Cougar Land. And so, but you know, this is such an important first ever occasion for a conference like this in Houston. We all go to energy conferences all the time, but something with a sharp focus that says, how do we build for the future? How do we really make that pivot and make it across the ecosystem? Not a single silo. Think outside the silos. Bring the silos together, really fuse them together, because we are really looking to solve a system-wide challenge. And perhaps one of the big secrets about Houston is 1 in 5 graduates in the city of Houston has a U of H degree. Right? We supply about half the workforce coming into the energy world on an annual basis. And so a large, and 75% of them are non-engineers. And if we take the business folks out, it's about half the students that enter the energy world from the University of Houston are neither engineering nor business. Right? So they're from the liberal arts, they're from social sciences, they're from communications. Our Valenti School of Communications puts out 20 to 25 graduates, all of them ending up working in the energy industry or related in some way closely to that energy industry. So we have a huge sort of role to play, in trying to figure out where the field is going, where the world is going, and really provide that big factor, which is that workforce, that people readiness. And I think there's a second component to this, which is important. It's again about people. How do we use a neutral platform, such as the university, to reach out to everybody across all stripes and suggest to them that what we need is affordable, reliable energy that is sustainable and is available for all. 1 in 5 Houstonians lives in what we call energy poverty. We, as the energy capital of the world, as the energy transition capital of the world, we cannot afford to let that happen going forward.
So it's so interesting that you talk about this, the whole concept of silos and whatnot. This is a huge city, and I mean, I know the energy industry doesn't want to hear this, but there are other industries in Houston, right? We've got space, we've got medicine, we have art, and I'm fascinated because the response to this has been really community driven. It's been, hey, what does the community want? How do we design, the community for the future? So I'm glad you brought that up, because that's the importance of this week. This week is about how do we build better, build infrastructure, harden the infrastructure, but how do we get people ready, right, for this transition? And I don't even know that we can say that the transition is coming. The transition is here, and we are living it. Some of us, very real time. So let's talk a little bit about this. So Angela, I know that so you and I, we met on Twitter. Was it Twitter or Facebook? Okay, we met on that platform formerly known as Twitter, and that was during Hurricane Harvey. I remember you were working 7 years ago to help. You were kind of ground zero, helping with response. You were in obviously a different role then. Have we learned anything? And I think that you are somebody who can really answer this question very bluntly, because you have been on the ground. You've been able to see the cycles that we've gone through with these storms and the infrastructure piece.
So,
is it on?
it turns out as a species, we're slow learners. And I recently saw a description of disaster cycles, and it's like the event, response, recovery, amnesia, and then we go back. And let me speak to the culture of this city. We have a mindset that's kind of a boosterism culture. We can overcome anything, we can outwork anything, we can engineer our way out of everything. And on the one hand, that's great. We also have a city filled with people that have actually been through much worse than what they faced in Houston in a disaster. So they are truly resilient at the core unit of the individual. Unfortunately, what that does for us is lead us to think, instead of preparing and changing and evolving and creating new systems and new types of infrastructure, building materials, et cetera, we just think we'll just plow through whatever the storms throw at us. And that cultural change in our thinking would make us a much stronger city, because we don't need to be a city that operates like every year is an episode of Survivor, right? But that said, what Katie says is true. We are in the midst of something that we must face. The olden days were a period of hurricane vulnerability, storm season. The rest of the year, we could forget about it. I hope every one of you, I doubt it, but I hope every one of you is 360 degrees prepared, 365 days a year. Because my first rule in hurricanes and storms, the first bit of wisdom is no one's coming. And we must be prepared for a world in which the size and scale of what happens exceeds the capacity of systems to respond. So let's tie that to energy and resilience. And I know that feels shocking when I say that. I promise It's the world we're in, and we're the equal of it, if we will face it. So on the energy side, we see people with means and resources go out and get a Generac. We forgot between Ike and this last storm what a wind event looked like. So everybody, and also the 1.5 million people we added to the region, apparently when you come to Houston, we don't give you a little introduction to Houston. It includes exactly what kind of shitstorm you might face here. So that apparently is not considered a good thing to do. So they were shocked and dismayed. What we do need, and we are looking at it all across the city, why I'm at the city now, because that's the place where we can make change, where we can harden the infrastructure that guarantees you have water, harden the infrastructure that guarantees the pump station works, guarantees the lift stations work, because we all live on that. So the fundamentals, the bottom line, what does it take to make this city work? Come hell, wind, or high water is the focus. And that involves every form of energy. So if you've got any kind of theory or resource or agenda around microgrids, we're talking to you now, or we will be soon. Because that's not glamorous. That's promising to make routine what ought to be routine and delivering on what every one of us has to count on: business, individuals, communities, families, etc. Is that okay?
Yeah,
I got
you nailed that one.
Check in with the boss.
No, you nailed that one. No, and I'm just thinking, because on that same vein, when you spoke about memory and amnesia and those things, I'm going to toss the mic to Kelly. Kelly, obviously you guys have been around for 140. Oh, I got my facts wrong. Sorry about that. 240 years. 240 years?
Isn't that insane?
That is, wow. Okay. Is that like the oldest agency in the history of the U.S.?
Well, it could very well be. It's one of the ones that was brought on board to build airstrips during World War.
Right. So infrastructure is the Army Corps' core, right? So tell us a little bit more about that and the role you guys play in the infrastructure piece, but more importantly, I know that you've recently released a climate adaptation plan to reduce the risks of climate to our infrastructure. And I know we're going to talk about infrastructure here in Houston, but you guys do infrastructure all over. Okay.
All right, so the Corps of Engineers mission is like fivefold at this point. We focus on the interface of land and water. We are a navigation engineering firm, if you think about it that way. We're also flood risk management. On the side, we do ecosystem restoration, which is odd, but I will tie that together in a minute. And what we're starting to kind of pivot to is coastal storm risk management. And that's not to say protection, it's risk management. The idea being that we are the largest port in the nation. We have a monster industry here around that port and other ports all the way down the coast. We need to be able to stay at that interface and operate at that interface. And so one of the things that we're seeing is a significant need for infrastructure to be able to offer risk reduction. We know how to do this. The Corps has been building dams for a very long time. We know how to hold water in place. So what we've been doing with, I'll call it the Ike Dike only once because everybody knows the Ike Dike concept. The Coastal Texas Project is not your mother's Ike Dike. It's much bigger. It includes things like green infrastructure all the way down the coast to help stop things like erosion of those kind of natural systems that protect us, that Mother Nature put in place, but are slowly disappearing over time. It's also an intentional act to put something in front of storm surge, literally build the largest piece of infrastructure we've ever built in our history to hold back that surge at the Gulf and not allow it into Galveston Bay. And that is going to be something I will tie to what you were saying, which is that I will not live to see this. The kids that are in high school right now will go to college and then pop out the other side and be the engineers who design it, and the biologists who assess it, and the real estate specialists who work to get the land to construct it. The kids in middle school will be the ones who build it, and the kids in elementary school will be the ones who operate it. We have to now start thinking multi-generationally of how to do this and how to grow up that knowledge and those people and bring them here and not let them go off into the universe, and actually provide this risk reduction feature that no one in the entire world has ever seen or built.
Yeah, jump in. I know. I mean, we already started talking people in the jobs piece, but I'm going to go to Jim in a minute on a question that kind of came to mind. But speak to this, because this is multi-generational, and I know you guys just did a piece of research that really looked at this kind of straddling the old and the new world. Can you talk a little bit more about that study and what you guys found?
Yeah, it does seem intimidating when you put it that way, right? You've got to build the largest structure that we've ever built, etc. But in 1930, we built the Empire State Building, right? In 3 years, we put that up as a monumental structure that can be then reproduced many, many times. I think it comes back to core strengths, right? Come back to, in higher ed, we say there are 3 C's, communications, collaborations, and critical thinking. And those 3 C's are absolutely crucial. But when you start to look across the value chain, most of the skills that you learn through high school, through trade school, through community colleges, through universities are entirely translatable. Because 50% of the non-business or engineering students at the university, they're needed in this new world that we're going to create, where you need those people who can develop communication strategies to engage people with. But even within, say, pipe fitting, let's just take the case of pipe fitting. Even in the new world, we're going to need energy to move from point A to point B. And we need to do that safely, we need to do that reliably, and we need to do that without harming people or nature. And so we need to have appropriate ways to actually have pipe fitters come in, set up those pipes so that they can actually work effectively. It is exactly the same set of skills that they need today. They need to be upskilled, perhaps. Small amounts of sort of understanding what's the difference between hydrogen and natural gas. That's an easy one to do once you have the basic skills of being able to weld and weld well, right? And so then it becomes a fairly straightforward. And I think this is really where I think we need to engage with our communities and say, these jobs that you're going into today have the ability to translate. You've got to keep your eyes open, keep your eyes and ears open, watch where the puck is going to be, and get ready for the way the puck is going to be.
Yeah.
And I think that's been the way we've all adapted, and I think it's no different for this next generation. Yeah. But these students who are there in high school, they are there in middle school, they're there in elementary school, don't know that this is the future that they've got. There is an assumption that somehow these jobs are going to vanish, it's going to be outsourced to robots or something else. No, this is going to be a contact sport where we're going to need people, but we want to keep those people out of harm's way. I don't want somebody going and standing on an oil rig. I don't want them standing on top of a wind turbine either. If I can have an operator go there and monitor the wind turbine, know what its state is, that's going to be much better than putting somebody else up there. So I think the workforce needs to be educated that there is a continuum, there's an opportunity, and there are great jobs that are available in this sector.
Well, I agree. I'm a big jobs person, so I'm glad you said that, because jobs are very important to our local economy. So what we're talking about here is a rebirth, and I know, Jim, this is like the ethos of your book, Education is Freedom, which I'm really excited. So big pitch, Friday, Jim will be speaking at the University of St. Thomas about his experience as a former CEO of 2 major companies. I'm curious, though, in the book, you have there's a chapter that says, "Nothing to fear, light the darkness with knowledge." Can you talk a little bit more about that and how that might apply to what we're talking about here? I mean, this seems like a daunting task. We've got a lot to do. Maybe speak more about what you meant by that.
Sure. Well, I wrote the book originally for young people to encourage them to use education as the key to unlocking opportunity. But as I got into the book, I realized that, you know what, we all need, this is really about lifelong learning, and a big part of our amnesia comes from our resistance to change and our fear. So I actually captured, Professor, I love the 3 C's. I've expanded those to 9. And I try to keep it simple. So I put it in the terms of what to learn. And the what to learn are 3 C's: embracing change, having the confidence to do something about it, and then having clarity of communications, both incoming through listening and outgoing. And then, so once you know what to learn, which is sort of the starter before you go forward, then how do you learn? And that is something like critical thinking that we seem to have all as a society parked. We all learned it in grade school. We don't do enough of it. Critical thinking, curiosity, which is the root of all learning, and creativity. Einstein called it intelligence having fun. So those are the how to learn things. If you can engage those, you can learn anything. The internet today is a portal to unlimited learning. There's nothing we can't learn with technology today. And then finally, the why was a couple of the C's you also mentioned. The first being collaboration. We tend to be, as humans, want to do it all ourselves. But collaboration is critical. And the only way we can collaborate is to recognize cultural literacy, the importance of finding others who are not like us and learning from them and bringing them in to the collaboration. And the final C of why to learn is character, because our character, I characterized it as the brand that we carry on our chest. You don't see it, it's not like a can of Coca-Cola, but it's those things that people can count on for being inside, the integrity, the compassion, the humility, those things that make us who we are. So thanks for bringing up the C's. I've now expanded on them, and it's called Education is Freedom. It's sort of a self-help guide for humanity, for us all to be able to overcome our fear and tackle things like climate and change and resilience.
Yeah, democracy issues and immigration and all kinds of things. I know we've unlocked today hard conversations to have. So I want to turn back to you, my friend. So tell me about a typical day in the life of Angela Blanchard, because you're in this new city role, right? And you started the role, I guess, kind of earlier this year, kind of mid-year. At some point, you tell us more about how this came to be.
Engineer my mic on. Yeah. Well, I started, Mayor Whitmire asked me in January would I help stand up a roundtable on disasters. First mayor ever to think that far ahead and begin convening people, because collaboration is fundamental and essential to any form of response or recovery. And so I began working as a volunteer, and on May 16th, this work as a volunteer, all of the interviews and the compilation of the collected wisdom throughout the city, we had decided to meet that morning, 60 of us, for 3 hours to make sure we were all connected and knew what we could count on one another for. This is very fundamental. And morning of May 16th, and around noon, we were congratulating ourselves on having done this mid-May in anticipation of hurricane season. And 5 hours later, we were fully activated. So I'm either extremely lucky or a dangerous woman to hang out with, some of both. Here's the deal. Here's the deal. What we've been speaking about are enormous challenges. Some of us start out in life, we look for a job, then we look for a career. We sort of incrementally build on our own capacity and enrich our lives in some way and try to create a measure of predictability. Others are leaders. And what you're hearing here is what it's like to set your mind and intention on something where you have a great likelihood of not succeeding, or of never fully succeeding, or of never realizing the result of your efforts in your own lifetime. That's leadership. It's a heartfelt and deep commitment to something that is not directly beneficial to you, that carries great risk, and you might not look good or be successful while you do it. So, and it's absolutely worth doing. I feel like my entire life's been oriented that way, and you meet the best people on that road. So a typical week for me now is hanging out with people who deeply care about this region, who understand its challenges, and we're really, really hungry to work on them every single day. And I want to point out that there's no better place to understand or tackle what's going on in the world, because the four major forces reshaping the world in this decade all intersect in Houston. They are climate change, and we see the manifestation of those shifts every single day, or we should be paying attention. The second is migration, and it stems from both war and weather, and both send people scrambling to higher ground, and Houston is always in the top 5, mostly the top 3 destinations for in-country and out-of-country migration, either as a first stop or second stop. People want to be here. They see it as a place, there's room for them. The third is urbanization. We changed in the last decade for the first time in human history to be the most urbanized species ever. Cities are where solutions are crafted. Cities are the fulcrum where these problems get worked out and tackled in rooms like these. So urbanization. The final one, we call it globalization. It's really, and that has political connotations, but what we're really talking about is interdependency. Everything that happens here impacts what happens elsewhere. What happens in Saudi Arabia impacts what happens here. Houston, this region, is essential to the country, to the world. We have spoken of ourselves as the 4th largest city, and that needs to change, because we're first in migration, we're first in energy, we're first in the port, we're first in the medical center. And my commitment is that this city, as an essential city, needs to be operable, come hell, wind, or high water. Our people are vital, and that's what we all must dedicate ourselves to, keeping this region, this city operable, hell, wind, or high water, because we know we're going to have all 3, right? Okay.
Angela for mayor.
Oh, please don't say that.
I'm sorry.
That would just make things so awkward at my weekly meeting with my boss. So, yeah.
No, I'm really glad you said this, because actually, so according to the 2024 Kinder Institute Houston Area Survey, are you familiar? If you're not familiar with this, I want you to go Google it. Kinder Institute Houston Area Survey. This has been done for 43 years, since the 80s, since the oil bust. We've been studying the attitudes and the perceptions and the perspectives of the region. And it says about 3/4 of residents, especially younger generations, supporting prioritizing renewable sources like wind, solar, and hydrogen. Klineberg, who's the co-founder, states the story of Houston is that we are there first. So that's exciting. I think that's really exciting. To you, Ramanan, when you think about how do we prepare for us to be first, and what does that look like? I think the most interesting thing, I know we've been looking at in the work I'm doing, is how do we make sure we leave no one behind, including the fossil fuel workforce that presumably with time is going to transition to potentially new opportunities or lower carbon opportunities.
Yeah, I think the biggest one you touched on, Katie, has been how do we make sure that the community sees the benefit of everything that we do? This is about people. Energy, medical, resilience, all of this is about people. We've got to put people first. If we do that, we're going to be fine. I think with people comes innovation, right? We've always been the place where people call out and say, we have a problem. We always call back and say, we have a solution, right? That's Houston. That's sort of the DNA of this place. I think we can't forget that. And we can't be a victim. We're never victims. We never play victim. we find ways to create solutions, and we create solutions for those people who can least afford to find those solutions. And I think that's really the core of this thing. We call it the energy transition, we call it new energies. It is a new way of of raising a community to be that resilient community that is going to thrive, not just survive or be operable. It needs to thrive. This society will thrive, this community will thrive, and we've got to find ways to enable how we can do it for all.
So, Jim, if you were a CEO of a major corporation, except that you were CEO of 2 major corporations in your previous life, and some of these local challenges were for you to solve, how would you approach investments, and what would you say to business leaders right now in this moment?
The first thing I'd do, since I'm from Dallas, not Houston, and I'm kind of Texas-centric, I would ask Angela not to be mayor of Houston, but be governor of Texas. I think that'd be...
Oh, I like that one. Okay.
Only people who don't know me well ever say anything like that.
In all seriousness, you nailed it, because that is such a big challenge. And I think if you think about all of those challenges that you described, at the root of it is the need for an educated populace. And I found this 20 years ago at 7-Eleven. I was having a hard time hiring store managers. If you wonder why there are so many first-generation Americans as store managers and franchisees for 7-Eleven, it's because they come to the United States, they realize we're the American dream, they work hard, they go to school, first thing they do with their money is send their kids to school, and yet we have cities full of children that feel like there's no opportunity for them, yet there is. So as a leader, I created a foundation that went into the public school systems in Dallas, and we showed kids the bridge, the pathway. Hey, here's a $50,000 a year job. All you have to do is get at least an associate's degree, finish high school, get an associate's degree. Yeah. But here's the magic trick to the solution. I came up with that because my board was trying to get me to cut the philanthropic budget. We were going through a lot of challenges, as many companies did in the early 80s, mid 80s. And I said, well, can I find something that generates a return on investment? So we looked at our cost for recruiting, for training, for retention. We said, my gosh, there's millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars we're throwing away with turnover. So what if we go into the schools and instead of calling it philanthropy, let's look at it as return on investment. We're growing our own future employees. That, I think, is the challenge. I've put that in the book as a challenge to all CEOs. I'm trying to carry the torch to say, hey, if we wait for state and local government to fix our education issues, it'll not happen in our generation.
I don't know. Houston has pretty good, we got it all sorted out right here. Yeah, no.
So it's a call to action for CEOs to see a supply and demand opportunity.
Yeah. And then Kelly, and then we'll open it up for questions. I'm curious, as citizens, what advice do you have to us as we kind of enter this new space around trying to build a more resilient community, a hardened infrastructure, and any other kind of thoughts you think that we want to impart to our citizens?
So, I can't see if this is on or not.
It's on.
Yeah, it's good. Okay, good. So the first thing to do is be aware and pay attention, because there are the storms that we are going to see in the future do not look like the storms of the past, okay? Climate change is going to supercharge every single storm that comes our way from here on out. And if you don't understand your vulnerability, where you're at and where you're vulnerable, then you will get knocked sideways when these storms come through. The other thing to be aware of is to build smartly and think about how one can actually improve your status, where you can actually prepare and recover quickly so that you will be able to go right back to work afterwards. What we're looking at is a situation where right now, if we were hit by a very large hurricane, it could take 40 days or longer for us to be able to stand back up and roll. The thing we'd like to see is that cut in half or even into a quarter. We're not proposing to kind of flood-proof and build up the industry. The sites are already flood-proofed and fairly well prepared for what's coming. But the people that work there are out in the community on very, very flat land in Texas, right? And so what we are trying to provide is risk reduction at a very large scale for not only Houston, not only Texas, but everything that comes through our ports, through the supply chains that goes out, that's affected by our preparedness and whether we are paying attention. People who move here need to be aware of where it floods and what likelihood it's going to flood in the next season, and to get ready and then to listen. If they tell us to evacuate, you need to leave. You should not be staying in place, because we will provide risk reduction, but that's risk reduction. That's not full-on protection. So you need to be very cautious about where you're living, where you're, what you're choosing to do day to day, and then you need to start thinking about how to improve upon that, and realizing it's not just you, it's your neighbors, it's your community. Yeah. How can you help them just bring them along with you to be prepared?
Thank you so much. We are actually out of time, so no questions, but I want to thank each of you. I know each of you well, and you all bring such a great perspective when it comes to infrastructure and people and communities, and really people need to understand that we can have all the capital in the world, we can have all the technology in the world, but at the end of the day, it's all of us that's going to make this happen. So thank you for being here with us this morning, and we're going to move to our next panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Good. Awesome. All right, what's next? What's next is policy. So we're going to have a really great, juicy conversation about energy policy here in Houston. And at this time, I'd like to call up Kyle Wiley with Connector, who's going to introduce our panelists, and then we'll move into our lunch portion of the program. Kyle? Hey,
Katie.
Good to see you.
Can I in the back? I'm going to have an interview when we
Okay, great. Let's do it. Hi.
Hello.
Good to see you. Good to see you. You got a minute? Where's KW? Where are they?
They're in the back.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Okay, in the back. Do you want to come? Do you and Juliana? Grab Juliana. Okay. Cool. Thank you. Hey, Kate.
There we go. Better? Better now. Yeah? Excellent. So yeah, Kyle Wiley, boutique government affairs firm. We do mainly energy and technology policy and work. So very excited for this panel to talk about policy as it pertains to Houston. We've got some really diverse perspectives, so I'll allow the panelists to come up, if they all will please, and then they will be able to give you a quick introduction of themselves, and we'll jump right into questions after that. Great, excellent. Representative, I'll pass it over to you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, we gotta get through high technology. Good morning. I'm Stan Kitzman. I represent House District 85, Texas House District 85, which is basically the 6 counties west of Harris County here. It's Waller, Austin, Fayette, and Colorado, as well as part of Fort Bend County. This is my first term. Looking forward to getting to go back in January and pick up where we left off after 4 special sessions. And I grew up in rural Waller County, still live there, went off to A&M and did all that. Spent years doing different things, not the least of which was 21 years in the Army National Guard, but I am a past county commissioner in Waller County, proud of my daughter. She did graduate from U of H. So, that's the short version of staying Kitchener.
Appreciate it, Darren.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Good to be here. Darren Rice, I work for Chevron. I've been, I'll date myself, I've been 30 years plus in industry. A bit of a fun fact, I grew up in the refining system, manufacturing and fuels value chain optimization. I'd say 20 years ago, I had my first superintendent role in a refinery, and it was operating a hydrogen plant and the associated equipment. You know, fast forward 25 some odd years later, I'm currently the general manager of strategy for hydrogen in Chevron's new energy group. Once again, thanks for the invitation. Today, we'll get into questions, but I want to convey a little bit of some of the industry insights around how we see the role of hydrogen and some things that need to be happening to activate. So thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Maxine Lunn. Am I?
Yep.
Okay. I work at the United States Department of State in the Bureau of Energy Resources. So I'm here to provide the perspective of how the federal government works with state and local, and in this case, with the city of Houston and its constituents, particularly the business community, but we've also interacted with various industry associations and have a long history of talking to the organizers of this excellent Energy and Climate Week, Katie and Juliana and the others. So I'm looking forward to this conversation and how we can continue to work together.
Awesome. Thank you, Maxine. Representative Kitzman, I'll jump right into it. You mentioned that the session is coming up right around the corner. Any big policy priorities for your district, and also kind of how energy policy might evolve, or anything that you're focusing on there?
Well, I think that one of the priorities in the legislature, again, is going to be water, whether it's water supply or how we handle it when it rains too much, or what do we do with wastewater. That never goes away, but it's becoming, I think, more and more critical to people, but not unrelated to energy is water, and especially the produced water and the water coming off of fracking. Is that a way to be able to use that for human consumption, or at least agriculture, irrigation, or whatever? So energy, especially oil and gas and water, are never very far apart. As far as energy itself goes, I think you're going to find a lot of interest in this coming session on continuing our relationship in Texas with oil and gas, certainly, but also with hydrogen development and the molten salt type reactors. I think there's a lot of excitement about that in the House anyway, and they're going to be looking forward to the development of that a little further.
Yeah, definitely seen the PUC working on the Texas Advanced Nuclear Working Group, so that's definitely a big priority, it seems like. Max, I'll kick it over to you. Tell me about the international perspective. How does Houston and the State Department play in the same sandbox?
We come down here a lot. In international energy policy, we find that it's most important to make sure that we're talking to industry at all steps of the way. And we do that with Houston in a number of ways. Of course, we're here every year for Sarah Week, and my boss, the Assistant Secretary, will be here next week for Gas Tech. And we have an ongoing relationship with the Energy Workforce Technology Council, which for decades has organized energy trainings for our officers around the world so that they actually get out and see how oil and gas is produced, what fracking is. Then we go to Exxon's sponsored wonderful hall at the Museum of Natural History, and we got a good tour of the history of the energy economy here in Houston. What else? We have, we're assigning a couple of senior diplomats to local universities, to Rice and to UT Austin, to help sustain the dialogue with the private sector. Just this week, again, my boss, Assistant Secretary Pyatt, is having a dialogue with some Iraqis who are in town to talk with U.S. industry about what it would take for them continue or to invest in some of the improvements that the Iraqis are trying to do. And I know that there's a lot of issues there, but they are trying to reduce their methane flaring and venting, and they're trying to channel that back into their grid so that they have to import less from, let's say, people who aren't our friends. We have done this before with Ukraine. There's going to be Mr. Pyatt is visiting with the Ukraine consulate this afternoon, tomorrow afternoon, in the near future, to discuss energy support for Ukraine and the upcoming winter. They've done that before, and we connect U.S. companies who are delivering gas turbines or whatever is needed, mobile power, to Ukraine, and we're talking directly to the people who are doing that instead of keeping it up in the theoretical.
So it sounds like to me a lot of it is forming these public-private partnerships with the government that help accelerate industry here in Houston. Darren, I'd ask you, I know you recently completed a study with the National Petroleum Council on hydrogen. We'd love if you could share some details on that.
Yeah, thanks for the question, and thanks for the platform. I'd say, first off, I'd say 3 years ago, just got myself in a position where within Chevron we have this Startup New Energies group, and it's just a privilege to be associated with hydrogen. And I've learned a lot in 3 years. There's a lot that I'm glad I didn't know 3 years ago. The other thing that came, a gift that came our way, is this opportunity, a question from the Secretary of Energy, Secretary Granholm, to lead a study by the National Petroleum, led by Chevron, to say, what does it take to scale hydrogen? So couple things I want to articulate is low carbon intensity hydrogen exists because of decarbonization goals. The fuel that hydrogen's trying to displace is a lot cheaper in today's environment than low carbon intensity hydrogen. And so the task of this group was to determine how do you scale and what is the role of hydrogen. So super proud. It was 2.5 years of work. On the one hand, I kind of go, wow, I can't believe that was 2.5 years. On the other hand, when I look at what we've done, I'm real proud of what we accomplished in 2.5 years. So before I forget, a bit of a plug. So www.npc.org, there's a lot of different tools. There's a 1.5-page transmittal letter. If you want to go deeper, there's a misnomer 60-page executive summary. And then, of course, there's about 1,000 pages of written detail there. But the point is this: what did we do? Over the 2.5 years, we had over 200 different participants from 100 different companies. The National Petroleum Council was the organization, but it's a bit of a misnomer in that 30% of those participating were oil and gas. The rest were energy, EPCs, NGOs, government, and academia. So great partnership. I think the diversity is a bit of why we took 2.5 years. Groundbreaking techno-economic modeling and analysis by MIT that helped inform some of the insights, which led to 19 insights, 23 recommendations, which you can review. But a couple of key points, just to kind of summarize, is in today's environment, we're not on track to meet net zero goals, hence the 23 recommendations. When you put some of the things we recommended in place around policy, around societal considerations, around technology, we think that hydrogen will play a role mitigating about 8% of emissions, those hardest to abate sectors, whether it's industrial or dispatchable power, heavy-duty transportation, at a lower cost to society, saving about 0.5% to 1% GDP, $160 to $260 billion a year versus other alternatives. And so I think that you need to unlock that, and you need to have the right environment in place, and it's a big, big task. I mean, to get to where we need to for hydrogen's role, it's like almost $2 trillion worth of capital invested between now and 2050. So I'll wrap up by saying 23 recommendations, maybe top 3, I'd say policy is we recommend a price of carbon. We know that's hard to get through in this political environment, so we have some bridging recommendations around a low carbon fuel standard for transportation and industry. Societal considerations and impacts, I mean, nothing works without engaging the community. There's some trust that needs to be developed as these new systems are set up. So whether it's through education, training, skilling, that's very important for it to work, and the community benefits need to come true. And then technology, it's just a bit of, it's going to take a lot of things to build these value chains. So critical materials need to be in place, codes and standards need to be in place, and monitoring and mitigation around hydrogen, because it's a slippery molecule. I mean, those are some of the things that I think the study kind of concluded. So thanks for the question.
Excellent. Yeah, no, it sounds like a great study. And Representative Kitzman, I will kind of come back to you. I saw you nodding your head about the partnerships and how that actually helps, you know, not only industry, but your district as well. How have you seen your district work well with either public-private partnerships as it pertains to energy and natural resources, or what's the secret sauce? What have you seen that works?
Well, you know, again, I kind of come from being a county commissioner and being on planning boards and seeing how these things kind of come together. There's a lot of things that maybe government ought to do, but there's a lot of things that government's not particularly good at. And we want to see the private side come in and be able to provide these services for people, because in the end, it's about having a quality product for the taxpayer and the citizen. And we know that in the current world, we get to take it for granted that energy is always going to be there. We turn on the lights and they're there. And hopefully we won't get a little reminder later this week about how fragile that is. But we get to go to the filling station and fill up our car. We get to look at the newer technologies. But the bottom line is none of that has to be. And that's not a cynical statement. That's hopefully one of gratitude for where we are and the work that people are doing today. So, you know, government may have its role, but we want these private companies and these other individuals involved to help produce the best product for the future. And that's where it comes to play. A lot of people don't like public-private partnerships, but I think if they sit down and really think about the talent of the government versus the talent of those individuals, they see where that's got a lot of value.
Absolutely. Max, it sounds like I know an issue that we discuss is energy diplomacy. And it's, you know, obviously Houston is the exporter of some of the best energy products, technology, resources, workers, you name it. How is that kind of taken part in your role? Or how does the State Department factor into that energy diplomacy idea?
So one of the reasons that we talk to industry in the United States is because we advocate for industry overseas. And the Bureau of Energy Resources, unlike the Department of Energy, is mostly external facing. We have a whole cadre of officers who have a specific number of countries in their portfolio, and their responsibility is to find out what's happening in those countries. And often companies will come to us and say, listen, we're having a problem in Nigeria or Iraq. There's contractual issues between the Kurdish region and Baghdad. There's, you know, you can go very deep on that. Or, you know, you're having trouble getting your product offloaded at an import facility. So we have the connections in the embassies all around the world, and hopefully it's our job to keep aware of who's in play in the governments abroad and who we need to talk to and who we need to introduce our business leaders to. That's one way, but I think that's very concrete and easy to picture how that works.
Absolutely. Darren, I'll turn it back over to you. Max kind of talked about that international market. What does the international hydrogen market look like as compared to here in the U.S. or even in Houston?
Okay, thanks for the question. Maybe I'll talk through the different components, right? And so, once again, hydrogen exists because of the emissions reductions goals, and so carbon intensity is something I'll talk about. From a policy standpoint, what drives this is the U.S. and international are very similar. You know, there's a carbon intensity threshold that qualifies for low carbon intensity hydrogen, not too different between the United States and the rest of the world. So I think that's consistent. From a production standpoint, I think that a couple things. One is the U.S. is, from a policy perspective, is very progressive, and that's what's stimulating some of this activation. And I think that U.S. is very well endowed when it comes to natural gas, low carbon intensity natural gas, when it comes to potential carbon sequestration pore space, when it comes to the ability to manufacture and some of this incentive. So well positioned from a production standpoint, and you got to remember that a lot of this happens in the U.S. because of our advantages, and some countries like Asia and Europe have declared the need for imports because of it. You know, they're not as well endowed. Infrastructure outside of the U.S. Gulf Coast, which has a lot of its advantages, we're a little bit behind the rest of the world. I think what's needed there is you've got, whether it's grants or loans to stimulate and permitting reform to give investors the confidence. Because people are going to worry about demand, people are going to worry about supply, and sometimes forget about, you know, the hard work as well as connecting the two. So I think we're not as progressive as the rest of the world. And then offtake. Once again, the U.S. has production incentives. The rest of the world is also creating demand-side policies. And so whether it's in Europe around emissions trading schemes or carbon border adjustment mechanisms in Europe, or in Asia where they've got some regulatory regulatory frameworks going, they are using these policies to create a price on carbon, a penalty to use their traditional fuels, which gives the economics to actually deliver these molecules. So I say we have a little bit of ways to go on the demand side. So.
Representative Kitzman, I saw you nodding your head. We talked a little bit about carbon capture and some of those new technologies. Maybe give you opportunity to expand on that a little bit, or something you're interested in.
Well, carbon capture is something that one of those other things that I think the legislature is interested in. And, you know, my district, again, is mostly rural, but it's the prime spot for people to come out and put up wind turbines or solar farms. And the conflict there is that you're destroying or replacing farmland. And while water and energy are big issues, so is food. And food security is, if it's not on everyone's mind right now, it sure could be pretty quickly. And I think COVID kind of gave us a glimpse of that too, you know, and it was more than just toilet paper back in those days. And but to have our own domestic food supply and to protect that, as well as working with the energy community. And I think you saw for years oil and gas and farming and ranching all kind of went together, especially in my district. But the wind turbines are coming up, the solar farms are appearing, and that's why when he talks about hydrogen or carbon capture to help with that issue, or again the molten salt reactors, I think those alternatives help kind of protect that farmland a little better. But the idea of carbon capture, there's a lot of talk of that along again with those that are producing water. What about being able to put that carbon back in the ground and save it that way? So there's a lot to talk about. The legislature is not a boring place. There's plenty going on.
Darren, go ahead.
Yeah, can I add or build upon that? So I don't know if you could tell, but I'm not from Texas. I'm from California.
Where are your boots at? You know?
Yeah, I don't have my boots, and so, but I'm from California. However, it's you know, you like to think about California as progressive and have policy enabled or policies that enable kind of lower carbon, but you know, I talk about the U.S. as far as an attractive place for this economy to take off. But then if I go a little bit micro, I talk about Texas and U.S. Gulf Coast and all the advantages that this geography has. You know, whether it's low carbon intensity natural gas, whether it's existing infrastructure, whether it's concentrated demand that wants to be decarbonized, whether it's pore space for sequestration, skilled workforce that knows how to manufacture, that knows how to make pipelines, that knows how to operate. It's just, you know, it's just an incredible position in the U.S. To take advantage of in a launching pad. And lastly, I'd say that the world is going to need this. I believe that low carbon intensity hydrogen will be globally traded. And so to have an advantaged location like here, in proximity to export potential facilities, there's just so much potential here that the leadership needs to, you know, start from here. The leadership needs to push from here. It's just a great place to be, right?
Yeah. Max, I'll let you jump in as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, a couple of things, just going back to what you said about what the international climate is on hydrogen. One of the places that international forums are useful is to talk about how we're going to integrate the international market for hydrogen when it exists. So standards, you know, it may be a very boring conversation for many people, but if you don't have some agreement on standards, then you're not going to have that market. So there are quite a number of countries that are coming out with their own hydrogen strategies, and we track that, and we see, you know, where things might be compatible and where things are not compatible, and try to address that. And that's where diplomacy comes in. Similarly, in sort of doing my research for, you know, what's around Houston and what's in Texas, I found this out a couple of years ago that Texas has the most wind power in the United States. Yeah, it's very large, but it also has, you know, that capacity. And I was pleased to read about the movements on nuclear and advanced nuclear reactors. It's something that we are promoting internationally, working very closely with U.S. industry like Westinghouse and NuScale, who are working in countries in Central and Eastern Europe to try to deploy these small modular reactors. It's not easy for so many reasons. And the other piece that I think is that ERCOT is looking at and that Texas is looking at is the storage issue. So if you've got quite a bit, I think it's about 25% is renewable energy right now in the Texas grid. When the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine, you need that ability to store that energy for when it's needed, and that is also coming up. So we're all sort of coalescing towards this energy transition, and one of the things that we like to point out is people like to create a conflict. You know, there's no story without a conflict. And we're trying to talk about this transition in a sense that it's not a conflict with what's already happening. We still have to provide affordable, reliable power, and right now that's heavily in gas. So, you know, we're pleased that all the work that is happening in the industry to make the extraction and delivery of gas lower emission and to share it with our allies and partners overseas, particularly Europe, in the last couple of years. The United States is the largest LNG exporter in the world. We'll stay that way for decades to come, with Qatar nipping on our heels. And our capacity has tripled since 2018. It will double by 2030, which will be triple of what it was in 2018. That's millions and millions of cubic meters of LNG that's being produced and exported throughout the world.
Yeah. Representative Kitzman, anything to look forward to in the legislature this year? I know we kind of touched on this. In particular, maybe as it relates to, you mentioned there might be a storm coming this week. Anything on that side of things, maybe grid modernization or preparedness, anything you want to touch on that side?
Did I hear somebody chuckle when he said, is there anything to look forward to in the legislature? I'm excited about going back. There's always, they may be complicated and they may be controversial, but there's always something interesting to work on, and a lot of good people from around the state, just like us, who are there to try to find some solutions to the problems. And, you know, they don't always agree. I think that some people are a little nervous. There's going to be a lot of new faces in the House this session, and so at least the first few weeks of everyone settling in and getting to know each other may be a little bumpy at first, but I'm hoping that's going to smooth out. But looking after Texans and their day-to-day quality of life, I think, is on everyone's mind, whether they always agree or not. I think the purpose for being there is the same, and that especially includes energy. You know, I don't know how the Allen brothers picked Harrisburg and where Houston is today. I don't know if they were paddling up Buffalo Bow and they just got tired and that's where they stopped and staked their claim or what, but to be in Texas is what was being referred to earlier, and especially to be around Houston, which is an incredible city. And I often wonder, you know, could Davy Crockett or Sam Houston, they could have never imagined what this has become, but also the wonderful things that people in Houston and in Texas, and Americans in general, but we've got to show, you know, Houston and Texas off here, what they do every day. And if you want to know about energy, you come to Houston. We're glad Chevron's decided to move here. And if you want to know about LNG, you come to Texas and you come to Houston to deal with that. And now we're certainly hoping that these new technologies and these new ways of producing energy, that Texas is going to be the place to come for that. And it's not knocking anybody else. It's just the incredible resources and experience that comes from here in Texas. And again, those people came from all over the world to come to Houston. You know, I like to tell people, if you're a world leader and you get sick, you're coming to Houston, Texas, to our medical center to get treatment. Well, it's the same thing when you want to know what to do with your natural resources and your energy. And there's a lot to be proud of. I think the legislature understands that, but I also think they understand how serious and how fragile this environment is. And I go back again to not as a negative statement, but that we don't have to have the great fortune that we do. I spent some time in Iraq, and I've seen how a lot of it through custom, they live the way they live, but they don't live like we do here. And we need to be appreciative of that and make sure that our policies and our laws and our philosophy transports us to the future to keep this quality of life going. And that means energy and water and food.
Absolutely. Darren, what's that vision of the future look like at Chevron?
I didn't realize you were going to ask me that question. Maybe I'll answer your question, but you triggered a reaction. So I think the point that I would say, our vision for Chevron is, I mean, echoing a bit of what my two colleagues are saying, is the world is going to continue to need ever more, ever cleaner, affordable, reliable energy, point one. I think our view of the future is that it will absolutely also be lower carbon. I think that the speed at which that goes is really the wild card. But I think the point is that when it comes to delivering energy that the world needs, there's a responsibility to use all resources and start to make headways on making sure that that's the lowest carbon intensity fuels. And so whether it's natural gas, whether it's low carbon intensity hydrogen, whether it's renewable power, you know, that's our view of the future, is that you need to supply energy and it needs to be at the lowest carbon intensity possible. So yeah, we're hopeful to be that energy provider. And once again, we recognize that there's so many countries around the world that don't live the standard that they should, and that's our role to help provide that.
Yeah, Max, is that something that you work on at the State Department, to kind of bring that U.S. standard, that, you know, reliable energy sources across the world? Is that something that you kind of focus on as well?
Well, yes. I mean, that is, energy is really at the forefront of our foreign policy in a way that it hasn't been since in the, you know, maybe the 1970s. for the same reason that energy can be used as a tool of coercion, and energy security is national security. So while we work on our concerns about our planetary security with the changes in the climate that we're observing, it's very important that we continue to support economic growth and stability around the world. And it's important that we keep our US-based companies engaged because they set the standard. They have the highest labor standards, the highest environmental standards, the highest engagement with the communities in which they work. There are many companies out there that are that cut those corners. And when we talk about, the United States as being an example for the rest of the world in our practices, it's our corporate practices as well. My, student colleagues may have some specific issues about specific things that have happened, but if you look on a macro level, United States companies are the beacon for the rest of the world. And we want to continue to promote them and to help them succeed, both, well, our job's overseas, but they have to succeed domestically in order to succeed overseas.
Absolutely. We'll do one quick 1 minute, close it out. Representative Kitzman, start it off with you.
Well, I do want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here and to join these folks here on the stage, and hopefully not boring you too much for the last few minutes, but the opportunity to sit down and visit with you and communicate what's going on. The only wish I had was that we could get more people to come hear these conversations, because I think they need to hear them. And the bringing you the best policy, the best energy that we can afford and put together so that our grandchildren don't have to worry about it. That's why we're here. And so thank you again for having me, and thank you all for letting me visit with you.
Okay, yeah, same. Thank you very much for being here. I think that, there's no such thing as a free lunch. So maybe my challenge to all of you is a few things. One is, I fundamentally believe the U.S. is a leader in energy and lower carbon energy in the future that's needed. And I believe that this area, Texas, U.S. Gulf Coast, is the premier place to make that happen. And I think that people want to do the right things. Sometimes they just don't know what those right things are. And when government or what have you has a million different voices that might be contradicting each other or not sure what the priorities are, I think the opportunity for all of you is to become educated on what are the primary drivers. Don't stay insular to your companies. Go out in industry, and whether it's coalitions or what have you, speak with one voice. Because if you can go, like the NPC did with 100 different companies, 200 different members, and make recommendations which people know are from a diverse group of people, that's where you start to influence, and you influence with speed. And I think that's exactly what is needed to transition this economy to provide the right energy at the right time, in the right location. So thank you very much.
I would also like to thank everyone here, the City of Houston, for being so welcoming to our colleagues in the Department of State to help educate us about the realities on the ground. And I want to encourage everybody to take a step back from the rhetoric of, climate versus fossil fuel. It's not really, that's not the issue. The issue is how do we continue to provide reliable and affordable energy to ourselves and to our allies and partners, while also transitioning to a lower carbon world, which is to the benefit of all of us, to the entire planet. There doesn't have to be a conflict, and when we stop talking about it as a conflict and we just get down to the work, which is what this area is best at, and we innovate and we get these technologies out into the world, the transition will take care of itself.
Excellent. Please join me in giving our panelists a round of applause. Yes, sir. All right.
All right. Thank you, everybody. How was that? I hope you had a wonderful kickoff to the Houston Energy and Climate Week. We appreciate everybody here and all that they've done to engage and to be a part of this. Now, go out and see some things.
Yeah, go out, see hard things. We do have lunch, so lunch is going to be around the corner.
The lunch will be in the multi-purpose room, so you're going to come out, you're going to take a right, and you'll go to the end of that hallway, and we have lunch and some extra tables for everyone to spend some time networking some more. And there are also box lunches, so if you want to grab that and hit the road to go to the next thing, you're welcome to do so.
Absolutely.
Don't forget there's plenty of other events. Tomorrow we'll have our grand opening for Energy Tech Nexus for those of you who haven't signed up. What else? We have 80 more events, cocktails, art, a 5K run. So go ahead, have fun, but don't forget to come to the closing ceremony in the University of St. Thomas. We will be wrapping this baby up and making sure that next year we do it bigger and better.
Absolutely. And we have one last thing. Are y'all ready? Turn it on, guys. Audio. This is the song. We wrote this for you. Go get it from our website, okay? It's called the American Energy Anthem. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you.